The Space Between Knives, a novel by Jamie Wright, for everyone who has ever confused hatred with longing and taken years to understand the difference. Part 1: What We Made of It. Chapter 1: What He Built. Ezra. The city looked best in the early dark, before the sun finished rising, and the streets filled with the kind of purposeful noise that Ezra Nairobi had spent 15 years learning to produce. From the 41st floor of the Hale building, Westhaven was a grid of amber and grey, the river catching light at its bends, the bridges like stitches in dark skin. He stood at the window with his first coffee of the morning, plain, too hot, taken before his assistant arrived, and let himself have the view for exactly 4 minutes. This was a habit, 4 minutes. He had timed it once, when he was a younger lawyer and still half afraid of himself, and found that 4 minutes was precisely the amount of time he could afford to be moved by something beautiful before the day required him to be something else. His office was large in the way that communicated exactly what it was meant to communicate. He had earned every inch of it. Dark shelving along 2 walls, lined with the kind of books lawyers actually read, case reporters, annotated statutes, the dense procedural texts that he had first borrowed from the public library at 16 because he could not afford to own them. His desk was glass and steel, clear of clutter except for one legal pad and the coffee. A single photograph in a frame on the corner of the desk. His mother, laughing at something off camera, her hand mid-gesture, caught in the particular electricity she carried everywhere. She was 62 now and still had that electricity. He called her every Sunday without fail. The shelves also held one non-legal item, a small wooden carving of a bird, rough-hewn, made by his father's hands before Ezra was old enough to remember those hands working. He did not look at it often. He kept it there anyway. Ezra Nairobi had made partner at Coldwell and Nairobi at 31, the youngest in the firm's history by 4 years, and the first name added to the masthead since Richard Coldwell died and left the firm to his daughter Claire, who was smart enough to know that what the firm needed was not a Coldwell but an Ezra. He had worked for it with a ferocity that people tended to describe as admirable, and then, when they thought he wasn't listening, unsettling. He had an ability to remain utterly still in adversarial situations that opposing counsel found disconcerting. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. At 35, he was known in the Westhaven legal community for 3 things: his record in mergers and acquisitions, his particular skill at negotiating deals that other firms had written off as unsalvageable, and the fact that no one at the firm had ever been to his apartment or seen him in a context that wasn't professional, except for the annual firm retreat, at which he was present but not precisely available. His assistant, Delia Okafor, arrived at 7:58, which was 2 minutes earlier than her start time, a habit she had maintained for 6 years. She was 47 and had worked for 3 partners before Ezra. She had, in her first week with him, assessed him with the particular accuracy of a person who has spent decades reading rooms, and decided that he was fundamentally decent and specifically lonely, and that the loneliness was not her business but the decency was, and that she would be loyal to him accordingly. She knocked on the open door. She always knocked, even with the door open, a formality he had stopped remarking upon because he had come to appreciate it as a form of respect, and said, "Good morning. You have the Hargrove team at 9, the Meridian call at 11, and I've moved your lunch to 1:30 to give you a buffer. Also, the revised term sheet for the Kellerman acquisition came through overnight. It's on your desk." "I saw it," Ezra said, turning from the window. "Kellerman's counsel added a clause in Section 12 that they know we won't accept. They're testing us." "Are they?" "They want to see if we'll push back or swallow it quietly. We'll push back. Draft a counter with the clause removed and a note indicating that we reviewed it and found it non-operative given the terms agreed in the letter of intent. Keep the tone collegial." Delia made a note. "The Meridian call at 11. Are you expecting trouble?" Ezra picked up the Kellerman term sheet from the corner of the desk and looked at it without sitting down. "I'm always expecting trouble with Meridian. That's different from it being worth worrying about." He set the sheet down. "Is Waters on the call?" A very slight pause. "I believe so, yes. He's listed as the analyst lead on their side." "Fine." He sat down. "Get me the Hargrove file before 9. Delia left without further comment. This was one of the things he valued most about her. She understood that his terseness was not rudeness but concentration, and that the greatest service she could render was to make his world run smoothly enough that he didn't have to spend energy on logistics he had already communicated clearly once. He looked at the Kellerman file. He thought, briefly and against his will, about Leonard Waters. The thought arrived and he dealt with it the way he dealt with most inconvenient things, directly and without ceremony. Leonard Waters was 24 years old and a junior financial analyst at Meridian Capital, and he had been across the table from Ezra on 3 separate deals in the past 8 months, and this was the most economical way to describe it, a problem, not because he was incompetent, quite the opposite. He was sharp in the way that young analysts who have something to prove are sometimes sharp, which is to say that he had both the ability and the aggression in equal measure, and he aimed them with a precision that Ezra would have found admirable in almost anyone else. In Waters, he found it infuriating. He was not entirely sure why. The first time they had met, a mid-sized acquisition, 8 months ago, the kind of deal Ezra could run in his sleep, he had noticed the young man the way you notice someone who takes up slightly more space in a room than their rank warrants. Not physical space, something else. He had introduced himself as Leonard Waters but said to call him Leo, and there was nothing in the name that registered. He had dark eyes and a mouth that seemed permanently arranged for argument, and he had looked at Ezra across the conference table with an expression that Ezra had initially read as the ordinary wariness of a junior analyst facing down a senior partner, and later revised to something sharper, more specific, personal almost. He had filed this away and moved on. He was good at moving on. The second time, a different deal, Leo had argued a point of valuation with enough technical precision that Ezra had been forced to actually engage with the argument, rather than dismiss it on procedural grounds. He had won the point eventually. The valuation was indeed overstated, as Ezra's read of the data suggested, but the process of winning it had taken 20 minutes, and Leo Waters had not conceded so much as a centimeter without demanding a full accounting for every inch of ground. Afterward, Ezra had mentioned to his co-counsel that the Meridian analyst was worth watching. This was the closest he came to a compliment for opposing counsel. The third time, which was 2 weeks ago, Leo had arrived at the table with a set of revised financial projections that, on their face, supported Meridian's position but contained, buried in the appendices, a footnote that contradicted the headline number if you were paying attention. Ezra had been paying attention. He had said very quietly across the table, "Your footnote on page 47 disagrees with your Exhibit 3. And Leo had looked at him with those dark eyes, and something had moved through that expression. Not surprise, not embarrassment, but something more complicated and harder to name, and said, equally quietly, "So it does," and that had been the end of the round. Ezra had not been able to stop thinking about that expression. Not the words, but the expression, which was the kind of thing that happens sometimes with interesting problems, and he was almost certain that was all this was. Almost. He opened the Kellerman file and began to read. At 9, the Hargrove team arrived. 2 senior associates from Coldwell and Nairobi's corporate group, a paralegal, and Victoria Chen, the client herself, 53, the founder and CEO of Hargrove Materials, a mid-sized manufacturing company that she had built from a regional supplier into a national one over 20 years, and who was now in the process of selling it to a private equity consortium for a sum that represented the financial equivalent of 20 years of her life's work. She was nervous in the way that competent people are nervous when the stakes exceed their expertise, which is to say, contained, but present in every line of her body. Ezra stood when she came in, shook her hand, and did not sit until she did. He offered her coffee, which she took, and began. The Meridian Consortium has come back with revised terms. The headline purchase price holds. The adjustment mechanisms in Section 6 have been tightened. That's in our favor. Section 12 has a new clause we're going to reject. He had already given her the written summary. This was for clarity, for the kind of spoken understanding that written documents could gesture at but not always achieve. The more significant issue is the rep and warranty insurance caveat they've inserted, which effectively transfers a category of liability back onto you post-close in a way that the original letter of intent didn't contemplate. Victoria set down her coffee. What does that mean in practice? It means that if certain representations about the company's environmental compliance turn out to be incorrect after closing, you could be personally liable for a portion of the remediation costs. The exposure is capped, but the cap is $8 million. A silence. "We'll fight it," Ezra said. "It's an overreach. It's consistent with a negotiating strategy that Meridian's legal team has used before in other transactions. They introduce late-stage terms that are technically within the letter of the LOI and rely on the seller's desire to close quickly to accept them. We won't." Victoria looked at him. "How confident are you?" "I don't make predictions." This was true. He never had. "I can tell you that the clause is weak in 3 specific ways that we will articulate clearly in our counter, and that their legal team is competent enough to know this and is probably assuming we'll negotiate rather than reject outright. I intend to reject outright." She considered this, then, all right. He spent 90 minutes with the team going through the term sheet line by line. By the end, he had 4 open items and a clear strategy for each. He sent them off with their assignments, saw Victoria Chen to the elevator himself. She thanked him in a way that conveyed genuine relief, and he received this with a nod, and returned to his office to prepare for the Meridian call. The call was at 11, he had 15 minutes. He did not look out the window. He read the briefing Delia had prepared and the internal memo his associate, James Park, had drafted on the Kellerman valuation dispute, and he thought about the term sheet, and he did not think about Leonard Waters. He thought about the Kellerman footnote on page 47. He thought about the call structure and who would be leading from Meridian's side. He thought, unbidden, about the way Leah Waters had said so it does, and the thing that had moved through his face in that moment, and the fact that it had bothered Ezra for 2 weeks in the way that unresolved things bothered him. Quietly, persistently, like a note slightly off pitch in a piece of music you otherwise knew by heart. He went to the call at 11. Leo was on it. His voice was low and measured, different from the conference room, where the body language contributed. On the phone he was just sound, and the sound was controlled in a way that spoke of effort. He deferred to the senior Meridian people appropriately and asked a single question, precise and well-timed, that shifted the axis of the conversation slightly in a direction that benefited his side. Ezra listened to the question and found himself almost leaning forward. He answered it well, he thought. He ended the call 12 minutes ahead of schedule with a clear set of next steps and a follow-up memo committed to both sides by end of week. He held his pen over his legal pad for a moment after he hung up. He wrote Waters, Meridian, Kellerman deal flag. He underlined it. He was not sure what he was flagging. He went to the window. The city was fully awake now, grey and loud and relentless. He had 5 minutes before his next call. He took them. The thing about the Kellerman acquisition was that it was, in Ezra's professional estimation, a genuinely important deal. Hargrove Materials was being acquired by a private equity consortium led by Meridian Capital, a Westhaven firm that had grown aggressively over the past 5 years and had a reputation for being effective and occasionally ruthless in its transaction structures. The deal was worth approximately $420 million, which was not the largest transaction Caldwell and Nairobi had ever handled, but was within the top 15, and it mattered to Victoria Chen in a way that made it matter to Ezra. He took his client's interests personally. This was not, his co-founders had told him more than once, entirely professional. He had disagreed with them quietly and continued doing it. What the Kellerman deal had brought into his professional life was, among other things, Leonard Waters. Leo was Meridian's analyst-led, responsible for the financial modeling, the valuation work, the due diligence coordination. He was young for the role, but his work was on its face technically impeccable. The problem was not his competence. The problem was something underneath the competence, a quality that Ezra kept arriving at and then backing away from before he could name it. He thought of it now, sitting at his desk after the call, the legal pad open in front of him with its single flagged name. It wasn't the arguments. Arguments were the water Ezra swam in. He did not find them troubling from anyone. It was something more specific than the arguments, something that had to do with the way Leo looked at him, or rather the way he chose, with visible effort, not to look at him sometimes. The way there was a weight in the space between them that Ezra could not account for by their professional relationship alone. He was, he understood, a difficult person to work against. He knew this about himself. He was demanding and precise, and he did not accept sloppy reasoning or soft terms, and he did not believe that politeness required him to accept either. He had watched opposing counsel lose their composure with him before. He had seen frustration bloom into anger in conference rooms and held his own stillness against it with a discipline that he knew looked, from the outside, like coldness. He was not cold, he was careful, there was a distinction. But Leo Waters was not losing his composure. That was the thing. He was meeting every push with an equal and targeted push back, and there was something personal in the targeting, something that felt less like professional opposition and more like. He stopped the thought. He had gotten good at stopping thoughts. He had gotten good at it, specifically, since Marcus. The name arrived and he let it arrive briefly, without flinching. Marcus was a chapter that was closed. It had been 2 years. Ezra was 35 and he lived alone in his apartment in the Aldrich district, and he worked extraordinarily hard, and he called his mother on Sundays, and he had a few genuine friends whom he saw occasionally, and he was by most reasonable measures a person who had ordered his life correctly. He was fine. He was effective. He had made a choice 2 years ago that had been the right choice for Marcus, who deserved more than what Ezra knew how to give, and he had lived with the choice because the alternative was living with the thing he had done by making it, and he was not ready to do that. He might not ever be ready. He closed the legal pad. He picked up his phone and called James Park to discuss the Kellerman counter and spent the next hour working, which was where he was most himself, most useful, most real. The city outside went on being a city. The river caught light at its bends. Somewhere across town, in an office building he had never been to, Leonard Waters was probably doing something with a spreadsheet, and he was probably doing it with the particular focused aggression that Ezra had catalogued without meaning to over 8 months of crossing swords. None of this was relevant. He worked. The Kellerman deal had its first formal joint session scheduled for Thursday, Meridian's team and Caldwell's team in the same room, a conference room at the Hale building, with the intent of working through the outstanding term disputes. The room was booked for 4 hours, which Ezra privately thought was optimistic. He arrived 10 minutes early, as he always did, and reviewed his notes at the head of the table. James Park arrived 2 minutes later. Along with the senior associate on the deal, a third year named Sophia Reyes, whose judgment he trusted and whose approach to litigation was satisfyingly precise. They arranged themselves. The Kellerman files were organized along the table. Delia had ordered coffee for the room. Meridian's team arrived at 5 past the hour, which was technically on time, but suggested a casual approach to punctuality that Ezra noted and set aside. Their lead partner was a man named Graham Sachs, 50, silver-haired, the kind of lawyer who had been doing this long enough to be comfortable rather than hungry. He shook Ezra's hand with the warmth of a man who believed that warmth was a useful tool, and Ezra received it the way he received most performances, with attention and without betrayal. Behind Graham came 2 other associates, and then Leo. He came in last, which meant he was looking at Ezra before Ezra had the benefit of seeing him approach. Ezra was aware of this, of the fact that he had been seen first, and felt something he chose not to examine about that fact. He nodded, brief and neutral. Leo's nod back was the same, brief, neutral, precisely calibrated to match Ezra's without exceeding it, as if they were negotiating even that. He was wearing a dark suit, navy blue, fitted in a way that suggested attention to it without vanity. His hair was its usual curly density, and he pushed it back from his forehead as he settled into his chair, a gesture Ezra had catalogued as habitual and therefore now associated with the specific quality of Leo's focus intensifying. He opened his laptop without looking at Ezra. He organized his notes. Ezra looked away. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "I'd like to propose that we work through the open items in order of complexity rather than order of appearance in the document, since several of the later items depend on resolution of the earlier ones. Graham, does that work for your team?" Graham said it did. They began. The first 2 items went smoothly, the adjustment mechanisms that had already been substantially agreed, the closing conditions that required only minor clarification. The room had the quality of productive tension that Ezra found satisfying, people working rather than performing, a shared focus on the problem rather than on themselves. The third item was the Section 12 clause. Ezra said, "We're rejecting the clause as drafted." He was looking at Graham when he said it, but he was aware, in the way he was aware of most things in the room, of the small shift in Leo's posture. "I understand your position," Graham said, "but I think we have a strong argument that." "The clause contradicts the letter of intent," Ezra said, "and I think you know that. I don't think we need to spend time establishing what both sides understand to be true." A brief pause. Graham smiled, a lawyer's smile measuring. "Fair enough, let's talk about what a revised version might look like." "We are open to a revised version that keeps the liability cap at the agreed number and removes the caveat for the environmental category. We'll accept a general caveat for fraud." From across the table, Leo spoke for the first time since the room had assembled. His voice was level. "The fraud caveat is fairly standard. The environmental caveat is what's actually doing work in this clause, and we have client-specific reasons for wanting it in." Ezra turned his attention to Leo. "What are the client-specific reasons?" "Meridian has obligations to its LPs regarding environmental liability exposure in its portfolio companies. Keeping it general doesn't give them what they need." Then Meridian should have raised that concern when the LOI was drafted rather than introducing it as a late-stage term. He kept his voice neutral. This was the art, to say hard things without giving them a tone that made the other side feel they needed to defend their dignity rather than their position. "We're not opposed to addressing a legitimate concern. We are opposed to absorbing liability that was agreed to sit elsewhere." Leo held his gaze. There was, again, that thing, that quality in his eyes that was not quite what a professional disagreement should look like, and if we can demonstrate that the environmental exposure in the due diligence findings supports the concern. Show us the findings. A pause, Graham glanced at Leo, a quick communicative look that Ezra filed without making visible. We'll need to check on what can be shared, Graham said. We'll wait, Ezra said, and moved on to item 4. The session went 3 hours. By the end, they had closed 2 items and narrowed a third, and the Section 12 clause remained open pending Meridian's disclosure. As people gathered their things and the room shifted into the brief, careful cordiality of a productive but unresolved negotiation, Ezra gathered his own files. He was aware of Leo doing the same at the other end of the table, not looking at him. As the room thinned, they ended up briefly parallel, moving toward the door at the same pace, both reaching for the exit at the same moment. Leo stopped and let Ezra go first, in a way that was not exactly courtesy. It was too precisely timed for that, too deliberate, and said very quietly, looking at the middle distance rather than at Ezra, "You knew about the LP clause." Ezra paused. "Excuse me." "You knew about the LP environmental clause. You've done deals with Meridian before. You knew it was coming and you let us put it on the table first." He considered this. It was accurate as it happened. Not precisely as Leo had constructed it, but functionally correct. Ezra had worked a transaction with Meridian 2 years earlier, in which a similar late-stage clause had appeared, and he had read the pattern and prepared accordingly. "I'm prepared for every session," Ezra said. He kept his voice neutral. "So are you, I'd imagine." Leo looked at him then, directly, which was not nothing, since Leo's directness had a quality to it that was always a deliberate choice rather than a default. Those dark eyes, that something complicated running underneath them. "Yes," he said, "I am." And he walked out. Ezra stood in the doorway for a moment. He was not rattled. He was very rarely rattled. But there was a quality to the moment that he held in his mind all the way back to his office, examining it as he examined all interesting problems, thoroughly from multiple angles, looking for the thing he was missing. He didn't find it, not that afternoon, but he kept looking. Chapter 2. There was a quality to Ezra Nairobi's stillness that Leo had spent 8 months trying to describe accurately, and the closest he had come was this. It was like watching a city skyline in a rainstorm. Everything around him could be chaos, negotiation, performance, and he would simply stand inside it, or sit inside it, or look at it across a conference room table, and be entirely infuriatingly present. Unmoved, not cold, present. Leo hated it. He hated it with the specific, intimate hatred of a person who has thought about the object of their hatred at length, and knows its contours. He had thought about Ezra Nairobi at significant length. This was, he understood, a problem. His apartment was on the 14th floor of the Claremont, a building in the Midpoint district that had been built in the 90s and was still mostly decent. Good natural light, double-paned windows that kept out most of the street noise, a kitchen that was functional if modest. He had lived there for 8 months, since the job at Meridian and the relocation from the city he'd grown up in, 4 hours west by train. The apartment had that quality of a life in process, not settled, not quite temporary, the furniture from various points of his 20s assembled without a unifying vision. His mother had a vision for rooms. He had inherited this partially and managed to apply it nowhere consistently. He was 24 years old and making more money than he had ever imagined making, and spending approximately 65% of his waking hours working, which was not the highest percentage on record among Meridian analysts but was respectable, and he spent the rest in a state that he described to Priya as decompression and Priya described as rumination with snacks. Priya Kapoor was his desk neighbor at Meridian, 2 years older, 5 times as fashionable, and possessed of an uncanny ability to read people that she deployed with both warmth and mischief, a combination Leo found both invaluable and occasionally terrifying. She was his closest friend in Westhaven. She was, as far as Leo was aware, the only person in his life who asked him how he was doing and actually waited for the answer. He was awake at 6:15, which was natural for him. His body had settled into early morning without any particular effort from his mind, which was still in the first minutes, a pleasantly empty place. He made coffee in his French press with the deliberate attention of someone who had decided that this, at least, was going to be done correctly, and stood at his window looking at the city in the early grey light. Westhaven was a grey city. He had not expected to find this beautiful and did. The greyness was the productive kind, cloud cover, reflected light, a certain quality of flatness in the sky before the sun properly arrived, and the city under it looked alive the way things under glass look alive, contained and present. He thought about the session yesterday. He thought about Ezra Nairobi saying "I'm prepared for every session" in the tone of a person who has the particular luxury of having always been prepared. He thought about the moment in the doorway and the 2 seconds of actual looking, the moment when he'd said yes, I am, and Nairobi had. He didn't finish that thought. He had gotten good at not finishing that thought. He had gotten good at a number of things in the 8 months since he'd realized, in the 3rd minute of his first meeting with Ezra Nairobi, exactly who Ezra Nairobi was. Marcus was his older brother by 11 years. This was, objectively, too large a gap to make much sense of a sibling relationship, and yet they had managed it, partly because their mother was the kind of woman who made things work and partly because Marcus had, from the time Leo was old enough to notice, treated him not like an inconvenient afterthought but like a person worth paying attention to. He had taught Leo to play chess badly and driven him to school when their mother worked doubles and told him, when he was 16 and newly certain that his ambitions were larger than his circumstances, that being smart and being from somewhere small were not contradictions, they were fuel. Marcus was 35 now, the same age as Ezra Nairobi, which was a fact that Leo had noted and set in a mental box labeled Do Not Open, and then opened constantly. He had watched his brother fall apart at 23, when Leo was still in college, studying finance with the aggression of a person who has something to prove, and Marcus had called him late on a Tuesday and said simply, I'm not okay. Not in the dramatic way, not with crisis in his voice, but with the quiet flatness of a person who has run out of the energy required to perform okayness. And Leo had said, tell me, and Marcus had told him. There had been a man for 2 years, someone Marcus had loved in the full, unguarded way that Marcus loved things, which was to his core. And the man had ended it. 2 lines, Marcus said. 2 lines, face to face, and then he was gone, and Marcus couldn't make sense of why. He had asked why. The man hadn't given him a reason. Had said only that it wasn't working, in the tone of someone who had decided something long ago and had made their peace with it without consulting the other person involved. He'd referred to the man only as he never said more. Leo, who knew his brother, did not push. He had watched Marcus pull himself back together over the following 18 months, slowly, painfully, with the help of therapy and a circle of friends that Leo observed from a distance with relief. Marcus had met Jamie 2 years later. Jamie was a high school art teacher with a calm demeanor and a good laugh and an apparent boundless patience with Marcus's particular qualities, and they had been good for each other in the obvious, visible way that healthy relationships looked from the outside, like ease, like someone had put down a weight. Leo was glad, he was genuinely glad. He was also 21 years old, watching his brother rebuild from something Leo had never seen the full shape of, and he had carried the anger at whoever had done this, with the clean heat of a person who knows exactly who they would be angry at if they ever had a name to give it. 8 months ago, sitting across a conference table from Ezra Nairobi in the first meeting of the Vickers deal, Leo had looked at the man's name tag, Ezra Nairobi, CLDWELL and Nairobi, senior partner, and had felt the things slot into place the way things slot into place when you already knew, somewhere below thought, and were just waiting for the confirmation. Ezra, the age, the profession, Marcus had said lawyer once very briefly, then stopped. The manner of ending it, 2 lines, no explanation, gone. The particular coldness that Leo was seeing from across a table. It fit. All of it fit with a neatness that made him want to overturn the table. He had not overturned the table. He had been professional and precise and had gone home that evening and sat on his kitchen floor for 20 minutes, which was not something he had done since he was 19, and then gotten up and made dinner and called Marcus, careful and ordinary, and not said a word. He hadn't said a word since. He had instead done his job excellently and opposed Ezra Nairobi across 3 deals with a precision that he was aware, at some level, was not entirely professional in its origins. He had not apologized for this. He had, when pushed, been unable to explain it even to himself. That morning, after his coffee, he took the subway to Meridian's offices in the Halcyon Tower, glass and steel, 48 floors, the kind of building that wanted you to know what it was. He was at his desk at 8:15. He pulled up the Kellerman financial model and began reviewing the due diligence findings that Graham had asked him to compile for the environmental question. The findings were, he had to admit, genuinely mixed. There was an older remediation issue on one of Hargrove's subsidiary sites resolved, according to the company's own records, 5 years ago that Meridian's environmental consultants had flagged as worth monitoring. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was the kind of thing that might, in a different economic climate or with different regulatory attention, become relevant. He could see, looking at it clearly, why Meridian wanted some protection. He could also see, looking at it clearly, that the clause as drafted was overbuilt for the actual exposure. This was not something he planned to lead with. Priya arrived at 8:30, set a second coffee on his desk without being asked, and looked at his screen. Kellerman. Environmental findings. Fun, she dropped into her chair. How was the session yesterday? Fine. You're using your fine voice, which means not fine. He looked at her sideways. The session was productive. Okay, and Nairobi was there. Later. Priya. She pulled up her own screen, but kept her attention on him in the peripheral way she was good at, present without pressing. You know, you could just tell me what's going on. I've told you what's going on. He's opposing counsel, and I don't like him, and it's a professional situation I'm handling professionally. Right, a pause. You've also mentioned him in about 40% of our conversations for the past 8 months, so. He didn't answer. I'm just saying. Please don't. She went back to her screen. He went back to the environmental findings. Outside the windows of the Halcyon Tower, Westhaven was doing what it always did, being relentlessly, efficiently itself. At the session, the joint session at the Hale building that he'd been preparing for with, he was willing to admit excessive thoroughness. He arrived as part of Graham's team, which meant he arrived slightly late by design. Graham believed in making the other side wait just long enough to establish an equilibrium. It was a small thing and probably didn't change outcomes, but Graham was 50 and had his habits. Leo had his own habits. His habit was to be ready. He saw Ezra immediately, which was not difficult. The man had an authority in rooms that Leo found deeply irritating for reasons he'd examined enough to understand were not entirely professional. He was at the head of the table already, legal pad in front of him, reviewing something with the focused quiet of a person who is genuinely working rather than performing readiness. His suit was dark, perfectly fitted, the collar of his shirt clean against the darkness of his skin. He looked like someone had built him to communicate something specific about what power was supposed to look like. Leo sat down across from him and did not look at him and opened his laptop and organized his materials. He felt Nairobi's attention pass over him the way you feel attention even when you're not looking. A wait, brief and precise, that said registered, filed. He kept his eyes on his screen. The session proceeded. Leo listened, tracked, waited for his moments. He had learned early that the error most junior analysts made in deal sessions was speaking too often. They spoke to demonstrate that they were there, to justify their presence, which made everything they said carry less weight. He had a different approach. Silence, and then the precisely placed question or point that shifted the axis, and then silence again. Graham had once told him his timing was uncanny. His timing in this room was complicated by the fact that part of him, the part he didn't acknowledge in professional contexts, was not tracking the deal terms but tracking the man at the head of the table, watching for the thing beneath the stillness, the quality he kept arriving at and backing away from. The Section 12 clause came up. Ezra said, with the quiet of a person who has already decided and is informing rather than negotiating, "We are rejecting the clause as drafted." Leo spoke, "The environmental caveat is what's actually doing work in this clause." He knew it was correctly placed. He knew it shifted the conversation in the direction he needed it to go. He also knew, and spent no time examining, that part of the reason he said it was to make Nairobi turn and look at him, and Nairobi did turn and look at him, and the look was focused, direct, present in the way the man was always present, like he had decided to see something and was now seeing it fully. "Show us the findings," Nairobi said. And the thing was, Leo wanted to. He wanted to put the findings on the table and have an actual conversation about what they meant, about the genuine exposure question and the reasonable response to it. He wanted to argue it with someone who could actually follow the argument. This was, he understood, a problem with dimensions he hadn't fully accounted for. Graham said they'd have to check on what could be shared, and the moment passed, and they moved on. At the end, in the doorway, he said, "You knew about the LP clause," which was true, and he knew it was true, and he said it anyway, because he wanted to know if Nairobi would lie about it. Nairobi didn't lie. He said, "I'm prepared for every session," and that was true without being the full truth, which was, Leo had to admit, a masterful answer. And then he'd added, "So are you, I'd imagine," and looked at Leo in a way that was. He couldn't name it. He'd been trying to name it for 8 months. He said yes and walked out and took the elevator down, and stood on the pavement in the grey midday air, and thought about calling Marcus and didn't. Priya took him out for drinks on Thursday evening, the kind of drinks that were not optional in the way she framed them. "Your choice of bar, but we are going," and they ended up at the Porter, a low-lit place in the Aldrich district that Leo suspected was too close to Coldwell and Nairobi's offices for his comfort, and he said nothing about this. They ordered drinks. Priya got a Negroni, Leo got whiskey neat, which Priya said was a sign of distress and he said was a sign of preference. "Tell me about Nairobi," she said. Priya, I'm asking as a friend, not a colleague, different bandwidths. He drank his whiskey. He thought about the doorway, the look, the way Nairobi had said, "So are you." He stopped, he tried again. He's very good at what he does. Yes, you've said. He's also, I don't know what to call it. There's something he's doing that I can't quite. He made a gesture with his hand that Priya would correctly interpret as I'm not going to finish this sentence. You know, she said, in the careful tone she used when she was about to say something true, for someone you've told me you hate, you spend an enormous amount of energy thinking about him. That's what you do with enemies. Is it? He looked at her. She looked back with the expression she wore when she was deciding whether to push, a kind of patient, measuring quiet. He ended my brother's relationship, Leo said. He had not said this to her before. She sat up slightly. What? 3 years ago, he and my brother were together for 2 years and he ended it badly. My brother it was a difficult time. He picked up his glass. I didn't know it was him until I was sitting across from him in the vicar's deal. Priya was quiet for a moment. Leo. I know. Does he know who you are? No, he was certain of this. Marcus had a different last name. Their parents had divorced when Leo was 4, and Marcus had taken their father's name while Leo had kept their mother's. The connection was not findable unless you went looking, and Nairobi hadn't been looking because he had no reason to. Does he know about your brother, that there was a breakdown? I don't know what he knows. I don't know what he's allowed himself to think about. She was quiet again. Then, quietly, are you sure the thing you're feeling about him is hatred? He put his glass down with more precision than was necessary. Yes. She nodded. She did not look convinced. She took a long sip of her Negroni and looked at the wall above his head and said, very gently, okay. They talked about other things. He ordered a second whiskey and she let him have it without comment. Outside, the weather was beginning to turn, the barometric quality of the air shifting, that particular pressure that preceded storms. He didn't notice it. He was thinking about the look in a doorway, and about the distinction between hatred and something that had not yet been named. Chapter 3: The Art of Not Flinching. Ezra. The deal began to fall apart on a Friday afternoon. In retrospect, the pressure had been building for longer. Deals of this size and complexity had failure modes that announced themselves subtly, if you knew what to look for, and Ezra had known what to look for and had been watching. The incremental friction in the environmental clause, Graham Sachs' increasingly cautious language on calls, a pair of due diligence questions from Meridian that should have been answered in the first week and had been pending for 3. But the deal had still been alive, still moving, still within the range of resolvable, and then on Friday at 2 in the afternoon Delia forwarded him an alert from a financial news website, a mid-level trade publication, but with enough reach to matter, and the headline was, HARGROVE acquisition STALLS, sources say environmental CONCONS threatened deal. He read it once, he read it twice. He set his phone face down on his desk and sat very still for approximately 10 seconds, which was how long it took him to assess the situation and begin thinking about what to do about it. The article had specifics, the kind of specifics, the name of the subsidiary site, the year of the remediation issue, the current pending status of the Section 12 clause that did not come from public filings. Someone had talked, whether it was someone at Meridian or someone at Coldwell or somewhere in the extended network of advisors, counsel and consultants that surrounded a deal of this size, he did not yet know. He picked up his phone and called James. You've seen it, James said before Ezra spoke. Yes, find out where it came from. Every person with access to the due diligence materials gets a call from us this afternoon. I want a paper trail of who knew what and when before anyone starts pointing fingers. Understood, Victoria Chen is going to. I'll call her, you handle the internal audit. He called Victoria. She had already seen it, her CFO had sent it. She was controlled in the way that he respected, which was to say that her voice was steady, but he could hear beneath it the particular quality of someone who has built something for 20 years and is watching someone else's carelessness threaten it. Is the deal dead? She asked. No, he said, it's complicated. The article is damaging because it puts public pressure on the environmental clause negotiation in a way that makes both sides harder to move. But the underlying deal terms are still strong, and both sides have financial incentive to close. I need to speak with Graham Sachs before I can tell you more. Who leaked it? I don't know yet, I will find out. He called Graham. The call was tense in the way calls are tense when both sides have the same problem but are not yet sure whether they have the same enemy. Graham said his team was reviewing it. He did not say no, it wasn't us. He did not say yes, it was. He said let's get in a room and talk about this, which was at least something. They agreed on Monday morning. Ezra spent the rest of Friday afternoon on the phone and in his office reviewing the paper trail and thinking. He was still doing this at 7 in the evening when Delia knocked. She had stayed without being asked, which was something he noticed and did not comment on. And when she knocked, she had her coat on and said simply, "I'm heading out, will you actually leave tonight?" He looked up, he had not noticed it getting dark. "Yes," he said, "soon." She looked at him the way she occasionally allowed herself to look at him, with the specificity of someone who has observed a person long enough to have a theory about them. "It's going to be okay," she said. "That's not something I can control." "I know," I said it anyway. She gathered her bag. "Good night, Ezra." He stayed another hour. He thought about the article and the leak and the Section 12 clause. He thought about the look on Leo Waters' face in the doorway, the level voice on the phone call, the way he had said the environmental caveat is what's actually doing work in this clause. He thought about Meridian and their LP obligations, and whether they had everything to gain from a deal that was complicated publicly. He was not yet ready to think anything concrete about what this meant. He was gathering evidence, arranging facts, looking for the shape of the thing. He went home, he ate something. He sat in his kitchen, large by his standards, though he cooked with only moderate regularity, and looked at the city through his windows and thought about being 35 and alone in a clean apartment and the particular quality of this life, which was orderly and important and missing something he kept not thinking about. He did not drink alone as a rule. He poured a glass of wine anyway and drank most of it and thought about his father. His father had been a man who was good at loving people. This was not a universal quality. He had loved Leo's mother, Leo's parents. That thought came wrong, he corrected it. His father had loved Ezra's mother, had loved her quietly and completely, had taken her hand in any room where they were together as if this were a reflex rather than a gesture. He had loved Ezra with the same completeness, and when the cancer took him at 54, when Ezra was 16, he had left behind a version of grief that Ezra had never fully worked through, and also a version of love that Ezra had spent 20 years unable to reproduce. Not for lack of wanting, for lack of believing that wanting was enough when he was the kind of person he was. He had with Marcus, or he had come close. He had let himself get close to that quality of love, had felt it forming, felt its weight, felt the way it made him simultaneously more alive and more afraid, and he had, when the fear exceeded the love, or perhaps exceeded his capacity to believe in the love, made the choice he had made. He had told himself it was the right choice. He still told himself this, with less conviction than he'd had at the time. He finished the wine, he went to bed, he read for 40 minutes and did not retain any of it and turned off the light and stared at the ceiling in the dark and thought, for the first time in a while, clearly and without flinching, I hurt someone. I hurt someone significantly. I do not know if that person knows why, and I am fairly certain that if I am honest with myself, I did not fully understand why either. He slept poorly. Monday's meeting was in Meridian's offices, which was a concession Ezra made without noting that it was a concession. Neutral ground would have taken another half-day to arrange, and time was now a concern. He went with James and Sophia. Graham was there with 2 associates and, as expected, Leo. There was a quality to Monday's room that was different from previous sessions. The leak had changed the air. It was a smaller conference room than the Hale building, 12 people around a table built for 8, the grey Westhaven sky vast through the windows. The morning was cold, overcast, the kind of day that seemed to compress the city inward. Leo was directly across from Ezra, which had not been the arrangement in previous sessions. Ezra noted it with the precision he applied to everything tired, not dramatically so, but in the particular way of someone who had slept badly and was managing the effects of this with professionalism rather than rest. The first 30 minutes of the meeting were occupied with the leak question. Graham's people had done their own review and come to the same conclusion Ezra had. It wasn't clear where it had originated. Neither side could point a definitive finger. This was professionally convenient. It meant the conversation could move toward the deal rather than getting mired in blame, but it left an absence where the answer should be, and absence, in Ezra's experience, had a way of filling with suspicion. Ezra laid out his position on the Section 12 clause, which had become more urgent now that it had been made public, a clear counter with the environmental caveat removed, and a strong rationale for why the existing protections were adequate to cover Meridian's genuine LP obligations. He was precise and thorough. He expected pushback. He got it, and not from Graham. Leo set down his pen and said, "The article actually makes our position stronger, not weaker. It establishes that this is a public concern now, not just a due diligence footnote. The market is going to pay attention to how this deal handles environmental exposure, which means our LPs are going to pay attention, and we need the clause. The market is paying attention, Ezra said, because someone decided to make it pay attention. Whether that's an accident or a strategy, the solution is the same. Resolve the clause quickly and cleanly rather than leaving it open long enough to give the market more to speculate about. And if we can't agree on terms? He looked at Leo. Then we'll have a conversation about whether the deal can close, and that conversation will be more expensive for both sides than the compromise we're sitting 2 clauses away from. Leo looked back. That thing was in his eyes again, the thing that wasn't quite professional opposition. But beneath it, this morning, something else as well. A quality that Ezra, in his years of reading people, associated with someone who is fighting their own position as much as they are fighting yours. Graham intervened, began talking about compromise language. The moment passed. But Ezra had seen it. He filed it, as he filed everything, and continued. The meeting ended 3 hours later, with the Section 12 clause still open, and 2 new sub-issues generated by the public attention. As people gathered their things, and the room deflated into the small talk of a session that hadn't resolved what it had needed to resolve, Ezra was moving toward the door when his phone buzzed. He looked at it. His assistant at the firm, Victoria Chen, calling. He stepped out into the hallway to take it. Victoria's voice was steady, but there was something in it that told him, before she said anything, that the news was not good. "I've heard from one of my board members," she said. "Apparently Meridian's consortium is considering withdrawing their bid." He was very still. "Where is your board member hearing this?" "A mutual contact in the PE world. Drinks conversation over the weekend." He thought rapidly. A drinks conversation could be anything. A stray comment, a position floated to test the market, a bluff designed to reach his ears and apply pressure, but it could also be real. "Don't act on it until I've spoken to Graham Sachs. Can you give me an hour?" "Yes." He hung up. He stood in the hallway, the clean, corporate quiet of Meridian's offices, the faint sound of the session still wrapping up in the conference room behind him. The door opened. Leo came out, not the group, just Leo, with a water bottle and his phone, and the air of someone who needed 60 seconds of space. He saw Ezra in the hallway and stopped. A moment, just the 2 of them in the quiet corridor. Ezra said, "Did you know they were considering pulling the bid?" Leo blinked, then the careful quality came down over his face like a shutter. "What?" "Victoria Chen's board has a contact in the PE world, who apparently heard something over the weekend." "I don't know anything about." Leo stopped. He looked for a moment, genuinely uncertain, and this was significant because Leo Waters was not, in Ezra's observation, a person who wore uncertainty on his face. "I don't know what you've heard," he said carefully, "but that's not a decision anyone at the deal level would be aware of before the partners." "Would Graham know?" Another pause. "I don't know." Ezra looked at him. He looked at him with the full attention that he reserved for moments when he was trying to understand something true, and Leo stood under that attention without flinching, which was also significant. "Okay," Ezra said. He went back to the conference room and asked Graham for a private word. Graham said yes and then said, in the private word, the consortium was having internal discussions. Nothing was decided. They were concerned about the public profile of the environmental issue and the timeline risk. Ezra said, "If you withdraw, Victoria Chen has 3 other buyers who walked away when Meridian's bid was strong. She'll get a deal done. Meridian will have spent 8 months of work and resource on due diligence, and walked away from a company that closes for 10% more than your current price to someone else's LP base. Is that the outcome your partners want?" Graham didn't answer that precisely, but he said, "Let me make some calls." The deal was not dead, but it was, for the first time, genuinely in question. And Ezra stood in the elevator going down and thought about Leo's face in the hallway, the genuine uncertainty, the unguarded moment, and thought, he doesn't want the deal to fall apart either. He wasn't sure what to do with that. He tucked it away alongside everything else he was not yet ready to examine, and he went back to his office and he worked. Chapter 4: The Damage Already Done. The call with his boss was the kind he had been dreading. Duncan Reeves was not a cruel man, but he was a political one, which was, in Leo's experience, a distinction that made little practical difference when you were the junior person in the room and the consequences were being distributed. He was 52, had been at Meridian for 20 years, and had the particular authority of a person who has survived enough cycles to have made the survival itself into a method. He called Leo into his office Tuesday morning and closed the door and sat behind his desk in a way that said, "This is a conversation you'll want to have sitting down." The partners reviewed the Kellerman situation over the weekend. Duncan said, "There are concerns." Understood. The environmental question becoming public has complicated the timeline. The LP committee needs to be briefed. There are questions about how the due diligence was managed and whether the clause negotiation should have moved faster. Leo heard the shape of this carefully. "Are you saying the partners believe the clause negotiation was mishandled?" "I'm saying questions are being asked." He kept his voice steady. The due diligence findings on the environmental site were provided to us by the company's own consultants and reviewed thoroughly. The findings were mixed, genuinely mixed, not a clear-cut concern. The clause we requested is standard for this category of exposure. Nairobi's team rejected it. We've been in negotiation for 3 weeks, which is not unusual for a term of this complexity. He paused. The source of the article hasn't been identified, and until it is, I'd suggest we're careful about attributing the deal's complication to the negotiation strategy rather than to whoever decided to make this public. Duncan looked at him with the measuring quality of a man who is deciding how much to say. The partners would like to see this resolved quickly. They'd like the 2 analyst-level leads to work together on a compromise position. He understood. The partners wanted the deal saved, and they wanted someone below them to do the visible work of saving it, in case it went wrong. He was the below-them person, and Nairobi's counterpart would be Nairobi himself, I'd imagine. He runs things closely. A pause. "Can you work with him?" Leo thought about the hallway conversation, Nairobi's look, that full, attending look, and the way he had said okay with the inflection of someone who was actually hearing what had been said. "Yes," he said. "Good." He went back to his desk. Priya was on a call. She looked up, assessed him and mouthed "You okay?" He nodded. She went back to her call. He sat down and looked at his screen and thought about calling Marcus. He called Marcus. Marcus picked up on the second ring, which meant he was home. He worked from home 3 days a week now, consulting work, something in education tech. "Hey," he said, and his voice had the easy quality it had had for the past 2 years, the quality that Leo had learned to trust. "What's up?" "Checking in." "Sure." A small warm pause. "Work." "A deal got complicated." "Deals do." Marcus made the brief sound of someone shifting position, settling in. "Do you want to talk about it, or do you want to talk about something else?" This was one of the things Leo loved about his brother, the direct question. He never made you perform normalcy if you needed something different. "Something else," Leo said. They talked for 20 minutes about Marcus and Jamie's weekend. They'd driven out to the coast, a rental cabin. The weather had been bad and they'd stayed in and read and cooked badly, and it had been, Marcus said with the understated satisfaction of someone who has learned to value this kind of happiness, genuinely great. Leo asked about Jamie's teaching. Marcus asked about Priya. They talked about their mother, who was planning a trip to see a friend in New Mexico, and was, Marcus said, deeply overcommitted to optimizing the itinerary, which was accurate and made Leo laugh. After he sat with the phone in his hand and thought about what he had not said, he thought about the look on Marcus's face in the immediate aftermath, 2 years ago, when Leo had driven to see him and Marcus had been thinner than he should have been and quieter, and had sat at his kitchen table with his hands around a mug and said, "I think I'm going to be okay, I just need some time." He thought about telling Marcus. The words assembled themselves in his head. "There's someone in my deal, the lawyer on the other side. I know who he is, I've known for 8 months. He put the phone on his desk and did not say any of these words. He had not said them for 8 months. He was not going to say them now. What he had said to Nairobi in the hallway was that he didn't know about the bid withdrawal. This was true. He hadn't known. But he had, in the moment of Nairobi asking it, in the moment of that direct, full attention, felt something that he had been feeling with increasing frequency and despised, a quality of wanting to answer honestly, of wanting Nairobi to have the true thing rather than the guarded version. This was a problem that had been growing for several weeks, and he was doing his best to not examine it, which was getting harder. Priya took him out for drinks on Wednesday. Not the Porter this time, somewhere closer to home, a small place in the Midpoint neighborhood called the Grey Hen that they had adopted as their regular because of its unremarkable merits. Good bar snacks, not too loud, the kind of place that didn't ask anything of you. She ordered gin, he ordered whiskey again. She looked at the whiskey and did not remark on it. "Duncan put me on joint work with Nairobi," he said, after the drinks arrived and before she could ask. "On the Kellerman deal." Yes, to try to resolve the clause and get the deal back on track. How do you feel about that? He considered the question seriously. I don't know, he said, which was honest and which surprised him slightly. Priya turned her glass in her hands. You told me last week the thing about your brother. Yes. Have you, she paused carefully, have you thought about telling Nairobi who you are? He hadn't, or rather, he had thought about it in the way you think about something you are avoiding thinking about, which was to circle it without landing. No. Do you think he knows? No. She nodded, and if he did know. He didn't answer right away. He drank his whiskey. He watched the bar, a couple at the far end, the bartender polishing glasses with the idle efficiency of someone who has done it thousands of times. He thought about being 21 and watching his brother rebuild. He thought about being 24 and sitting across from the man responsible with a professional expression and no indication that he knew anything. He thought about the hallway, the direct question, the way Nairobi had said okay, not defensively, not dismissively, just received. He would understand why I've been, he searched for the word, difficult. You think he'd be angry? I think he'd be, he stopped. I think he'd feel entitled to be angry, yes, and I think he'd probably not show it. What would you want him to feel? The question landed oddly. He looked at Priya. She was looking back with the expression she wore when she was asking a genuine question rather than a strategic one, open, patient. I want, he started, then, I don't know. This was also honest. He was, he realized, becoming inconveniently honest in all directions. He went home that night and stood at his window in the dark, looking at the city lights in the early arriving evening, and thought about the storm. The weather had been building for 2 days, the kind of gradual pressure change that wasn't dramatic but was undeniable, the clouds thickening and lowering, the temperature dropping in a way that suggested accumulation. There was a forecast for significant snowfall by Thursday or Friday. He thought about Thursday's meeting, the joint session that had been arranged, both teams at the Aldrich Hotel, a space large enough to work comfortably, neutral ground for once. He thought about Ezra Nairobi sitting across from him, in a smaller room with the full weight of his attention. He thought, I'm in trouble. He had been thinking this with increasing frequency and varying degrees of panic for approximately 6 weeks. He had not done anything useful with the thought. He had put it down, picked it up, held it at arm's length, tried to categorize it as something else, professional frustration, the ordinary stress of a complicated deal, the residual anger about Marcus finding its most convenient target. None of these frames held anymore. He could feel them fraying every time Nairobi looked at him. He was 24 years old, and he was fairly certain, in the way you became certain of things you did not want to be certain of, that he was developing something like feelings for a man who had broken his brother's heart. The irony of this was not lost on him. He would have laughed if it weren't his life. He went to bed. He slept badly. Outside, the temperature kept dropping, and the pressure kept building, and the storm was coming. Chapter 5: The Storm Before. Ezra. The Aldrich Hotel was a good choice for the joint session. Neutral, central, with a conference suite on the 3rd floor that was large enough for both teams to spread out and quiet enough to work without distraction. Ezra had used it before for exactly this kind of session, deals in their final, complicated stages, where you needed enough space to put the documents on the table and enough quiet to actually think. He arrived at 8:45 for a 9 o'clock start. He liked arriving early enough to choose his place in the room, to be settled when the other side came in. It was not a power maneuver, exactly, it was a preference, the same preference that led him to take the window seat on planes and the corner table in restaurants. He liked having his back to something. The conference suite at the Aldrich was set up with a long central table, 6 chairs on each side, a sideboard with coffee and water at the far wall, and windows along the south face that gave onto the street 12 feet below. The street was already wet. It had rained overnight, a cold, flat rain that had left the pavement dark and reflective, and the sky above the buildings was the specific grey of a weather system coming in earnest. He set up his files. James arrived, then Sophia, then their second associate. At 9 the Meridian team came in, one of Graham's senior associates, 2 junior ones, and Leo. Not Graham. Leo came in first, or rather came in at the head of the Meridian group, which meant that Graham was not in the room, and Leo was nominally leading for their side. He acknowledged this fact with no visible reaction, which was characteristic of him. He simply inhabited whatever the situation called for, without ceremony. He organized himself at the far end of the table from Ezra, which was the natural arrangement for opposing leads, and opened his laptop and said good morning, and Ezra said good morning, and they began. The session was productive in the specific way that sessions were productive when there was mutual interest in the outcome and sufficient mutual intelligence to actually have the conversation rather than merely positioning around it. The junior associates on both sides took notes and occasionally asked clarifying questions. The senior ones contributed on the technical matters in their purview, and Ezra and Leo worked through the open items with a focus that was, Ezra noticed, qualitatively different from their earlier sessions. Not the content, the positions were clear, had been clear, the compromises were findable if both sides chose to find them. What was different was the texture of the arguing. There was less performance in it. Leo said what he actually thought, and Ezra responded to what Leo actually thought rather than to what the position called for, and somewhere in the third hour of this, the Section 12 clause came to a point of genuine progress. A revised environmental caveat, narrower than Meridian's original ask, broader than Ezra's counter, with a liability cap that both sides could defend. "We'd need to confirm with our client," Ezra said. "Same," Leo said. He was reviewing the language on his screen, his brow slightly furrowed, pushing his hair back from his face with the habitual gesture that Ezra had stopped cataloging and started simply noticing. "I think this works structurally. The cap math needs checking. I can have James run the cap maths while we continue." James looked up from his notes. On it. They moved on. By noon they had 2 items closed, and the Section 12 clause in a state of provisional agreement, pending client confirmation and cap verification. They broke for lunch, sandwiches brought in, people dispersing slightly in the way of people who have been concentrating together and need 20 minutes of loose attention. Ezra poured himself coffee and stood at the south windows and looked at the street below. The rain had changed. It was coming sideways now, driven by wind, and there was something in the quality of it that suggested the forecast had been correct, and this was only the beginning. The street was thick with umbrellas, people moving fast with their chins down. A bus splashed through a puddle. The grey above the buildings had deepened to the specific shade that meant not rain anymore. "The weather app says 8 to 12 inches by tonight," Leo said. He was beside him, not close, just at the same window, also looking at the street. He had his coffee too. They were both looking out rather than at each other, which made it not quite what it would have been if they were looking at each other. "They said 6 yesterday," Ezra said. "The city doesn't know how to handle either amount." This was true. Westhaven's snow infrastructure was perpetually underprepared for significant accumulation. Even a moderate storm brought the streets to a kind of managed paralysis, the kind where people kept moving, but slowly, carefully, apologetically. "Do you have a long drive?" Leo asked. It was a polite question, the kind of question you ask at a work event when the conversation has found a brief neutral space. But Leo asked it with the small, specific curiosity that Leo put into everything, which made it feel less neutral. "No, the Aldrich district, 8 blocks. He paused. "You?" "Midpoint, I'd normally take the subway." "The subway usually runs through this kind of weather." "Usually," a pause, "until it doesn't." They stood for another moment at the window. The storm was picking up. You could see the change in the quality of the light outside, the way the afternoon was darkening earlier than it should have been, the precipitation no longer clearly rain or clearly snow but some mixture, and the wind pressing it flat against the glass. Someone on the Caldwell side called Ezra's name with a question about the cap language. He turned. The lunch break reconvened into a working session. By 2 the lights had flickered once. By 2:30 they had flickered twice. At 3:15, with James and Leo's counterparts still working through the revised cap math, and the rest of both teams either reading or eating sandwiches from the leftover platter, the lights went out. Not just the conference room lights, everything. The building's ambient sounds disappeared. The ventilation, the elevator machinery in the walls, the faint hum that occupied modern buildings below the level of conscious attention. What remained was the sound of the storm on the windows and the street below, a muffled, full-body sound, like being inside something large that was breathing. A beat of general uncertainty. Someone's phone flashlight came on. Leo said from somewhere in the dark, very calm, "City grid." He was correct. His phone screen cast a pale light across his face and the table in front of him. He was already calling someone. Ezra could hear the one-sided quality of a call beginning. He put his own phone to his ear and called James, who confirmed. His wife, who was in an office 3 blocks away, was reporting the same thing. The grid was down. WESDHAVN Utility was reporting a significant outage affecting the Central and Aldrich districts, with no estimated restoration time. The building's emergency lighting came on after about 90 seconds, narrow LED strips along the floor, enough to see by but not to work by. The hotel staff knocked on the conference room door within 4 minutes to inform them that the roads were being closed through traffic, and that the hotel was prepared to accommodate guests and any individuals who needed shelter from the storm. Both teams began making calls. The verdict came in quickly. Neither side was getting anywhere tonight. The snow was now serious. You could hear it even through the thick windows, and the radio on someone's phone was reporting closed roads and zero visibility. The session was suspended. They would reconvene when they could. The Caldwell associates had rooms at the Hale Building's satellite office suites and scattered to collect what they needed and return to the hotel. James checked in at the front desk. Sophia called her husband. Ezra did what he always did in a situation that required logistics, sorted it efficiently. He booked a room, they had availability, the hotel was beginning to fill with stranded people. He got in before the rush and arranged for his driver to go home and not worry about tonight. He called Delia. She was already home. She had left at noon anticipating the storm, and he felt a specific, warm relief at this, at the fact that her good judgment had taken her out of the city before it closed. He called his mother, who was in her house in the suburb of Kessler, and reported that her power was also out, and she had candles and was perfectly fine, and he was to stop worrying, which he received in the way he received most of his mother's directives, with acknowledgement and private noncompliance. At 4:30, with the hotel filling up and the conference suite cleared of working materials, Ezra found himself at the hotel bar. He had intended to go to his room, review what he could review without the documents, think clearly about the revised clause language and what he needed from Victoria before he could confirm it. He had intended to eat something and sleep and be available for whatever came next. Instead, he was at the bar because, and he was willing to admit this to himself with the kind of honesty he preferred to keep contained within the radius of his own skull, the rooms felt too quiet for the quality of his thoughts tonight. He needed, in a way that he managed infrequently, and with difficulty, to be somewhere that had the ambient presence of other people without requiring him to engage with any of them. The bar was a good place for this. Amber light, the good kind of warm wood, the particular murmur of a lot of people who were stuck together and mostly making the best of it. He ordered whiskey, neat, no ice, and sat at the far end of the bar with his back to the corner and watched the room. He was on his second sip when he registered, without surprise, the presence of Leonard Waters settling onto the bar stool at the other end of the bar. There were perhaps 12 people in the bar. There were 12 available seats at the bar. Leo Waters, who could have sat anywhere, who had the full range of the room, sat at the far end from Ezra and looked at the bottles behind the bar and ordered something without looking at him. Ezra watched him for a moment. Leo had taken off his jacket. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow in the manner of someone who has been working for 8 hours and is done pretending to formality. He was leaning slightly forward on the bar with both hands around his glass. It arrived quickly, amber in color, neat, and staring at the bar's surface with the quality of someone thinking very hard about something they would prefer not to be thinking about. He was, in this moment, unexpectedly, Ezra searched for the word, present. The professional container that Leo moved through the world in was still there, but worn loose, the way a tie is worn when you've undone the knot and left it anyway. He looked like someone who had had a long day and was now simply in it without the performance. Ezra looked away. He looked at his whiskey. From the far end of the bar, after a pause of several minutes, Leo said, not looking at him, looking at the bar, "I hear the roads are closed through tomorrow morning." "That's what they're reporting," Ezra said. A silence. The storm pressed against the bar's front windows, which ran the length of the room, large, fogged slightly at the edges, the street outside reduced to the impression of cars and lamplight and white. "I've never actually been to this bar before," Leo said. "The Aldrich has a good bar. I figured you'd know it." He looked at Leo. Leo was now looking at him, sideways brief, with the complicated expression that Ezra had been cataloguing and failing to fully describe for 8 months. Something in it tonight was different, not more guarded, less. "I work in the district," Ezra said. "I know." A pause, then Leo said, not aggressively, not the way he said things in conference rooms, but with a kind of bare directness. "Can I ask you something that's not about the deal?" Ezra considered this. There were many reasonable answers he might give. He gave the true one, yes. Leo looked at his glass. "How long have you been doing this?" "It's the law." There he made a gesture, brief and slightly exasperated, that encompassed the room, or possibly more than the room. "All of it, the way you do it." He thought about this carefully. It was the kind of question that had a short answer and a true answer, and both of them required a certain willingness to be, even slightly, known. He had not been very willing to be known for some time. The bar was dark. The storm was outside. They were stuck. I started as a clerk at a public defender's office at 23, he said. I did not intend to stay in private practice. I intended to do criminal defense. He hadn't said this to anyone in about 6 years. I was good at it, but the cases were very difficult, and I was 23, and I made the decision that I was more useful in a space where I could actually win. Leo was looking at him now, fully, with the listening quality he had when he was paying complete attention. So corporate law, Ezra said, and then the partnership, and then he made a gesture, shorter than Leo's, indicating the present. This. Do you like it? The question was genuine, not rhetorical, not strategic. Ezra held his glass and thought about the truth. Yes, he said. I like winning for people who have something worth protecting. I like the precision of it. A pause. I don't always like who I have to be to do it. Leo was very still. That's the most honest thing you've said in 8 months, he said. We don't have a deal problem to solve right now, Ezra said. I can afford honesty. Outside, the city went on being white and lost. Inside, the bar's amber light held them in its particular warmth, and Ezra sat with his whiskey and felt, for the first time in longer than he was prepared to measure, the quality of being genuinely present in a moment that wasn't his office. He said, "Your turn." Leo looked at him, something moved in his expression, complicated, waited. He picked up his glass. "All right," he said, "my turn." And the night opened up in front of them, and what they did with it was not what either of them would have predicted. Part 2: The Night and What It Made. Chapter 6: What Whiskey Does. He had meant to say your turn the way you say your turn in a bar conversation. Lightly, with the understood contract that neither person was obligated to actually deliver on the offer, that it was a social nicety and not a demand. He had not meant it as an invitation to honesty, primarily because he had not yet decided whether he was in a state to be honest, and did not want the decision made for him by the structure of the conversation. But then Ezra Nairobi had said, "I don't always like who I have to be to do it," and Leo had said, "Your turn," and now they were here. I was pre-med, Leo said. He had not planned to say this, for 2 years. Nairobi's expression did not change in any dramatic way, but there was a quality of attention that sharpened. In college. Yes, I thought I wanted to be a physician because someone I was close to was sick when I was a teenager and he stopped. He started again. It felt like the thing to want, the thing that would mean something. And then I took an economics course and a statistics course, and I found out that numbers made sense to me in a way that nothing else did, and I switched. What did the person who was sick think about it? He paused. This was the kind of follow-up question that revealed how closely someone was listening. He said I should do what I was good at. He was very practical about things like that. He drank his whiskey. He's fine now. Good. They sat with that for a moment. The bar was warmer than the rest of the hotel, lit from below somehow, the amber coming up from the bar surface itself, or so it seemed, and filling slowly as more hotel guests found their way down from rooms that were presumably too quiet for the circumstances. Leo had a general, unfocused awareness of the other people in the bar, the way you have awareness of background noise, present, not attended to. He attended to Ezra Nairobi. This was not a deliberate choice. It had not been a deliberate choice for some time. "How long have you been at Coldwell?" he asked. 10 years. I joined as an associate at 25, made senior associate at 28, partner at 31. Claire Coldwell. Yes. Is she, he weighed the question, is the firm what she wants it to be with you in it? Something moved through Nairobi's expression, something that might, at a considerable distance, have been amusement. You're asking whether Claire is comfortable with a Kenyan-American senior partner. I'm asking whether the culture of the firm is supportive, for you specifically. That's a more diplomatic version of the same question. Yes. Nairobi was quiet for a moment. Claire cares about outcomes, the quality of the work, the caliber of the clients, the firm's standing. She is not, to my knowledge, interested in anything except those things, which means that if the work is good, the person doing the work is fine. A pause. That's not the same as a warm and welcoming culture. It is a workable one. Do you want warm and welcoming? I want functional and fair. He picked up his glass. Warmth is overrated as a professional value, I think. It often asks people to perform a quality rather than cultivate one. Or it asks people who are already tired of performing to perform one more thing. Nairobi looked at him. The directness of it, those dark eyes fully on him, not the professional attending but something more immediate, made something in Leo's chest do the thing it had been doing for 6 weeks, the thing he'd been calling anxiety because that was the least inconvenient name for it. Yes, Nairobi said, exactly. The second drinks arrived. Leo hadn't noticed ordering. The bartender had apparently made a judgment, and the bar settled into the particular ambient warmth of a city night, when the city had been rendered temporarily helpless by weather and was making the best of it. Someone at the other end of the bar laughed at something. A couple near the window was leaning together over a phone, probably reading the storm coverage. The windows were entirely white now, no street visible, just the impression of light behind moving white. Leo thought about the session, about the revised environmental clause language and the cap math and the 2 items they'd closed. He thought about the deal and whether it would hold and whether Victoria Chen would sign off on the compromise, and whether he was going to get out of this with his professional reputation intact or whether the leak and the consortium's wavering and Duncan's political maneuvering would leave him holding something that wasn't entirely his fault but would be attributed to him anyway. He thought about all of this and then set it aside because it was not useful to think about tonight, when he couldn't do anything about it, and turned his attention back to the man beside him. Beside him now, not at the other end of the bar, the geography having shifted at some point in the past 20 minutes by incremental and unannounced degrees, and said, "Did you always want to be a lawyer?" No, the answer was immediate, and it surprised him, because Nairobi was the kind of person who seemed to have always wanted exactly what he became. I wanted to be competent at something, at anything. He held his glass and looked at it. I grew up without resources. My father died when I was 16. My mother worked very hard. I had a particular orientation toward achievement that was less about what I was achieving and more about the fact of the achievement itself. The law turned out to be the thing I was best at. Leo thought about this, and now I've been doing it for 15 years, and it's no longer a thing I chose by process of elimination. It's a thing I chose. A pause. That's its own kind of comfort. Different from passion. Different from passion, he looked at Leo. Do you have passion for what you do? Yes, no hesitation. I love the numbers. I love the way data has a shape if you look at it long enough, the patterns. I love financial modeling because it's a kind of story. You're telling a story about the future through data, and the quality of the story depends on the quality of the thinking, and when the thinking is good it has he made a gesture that he was aware was slightly incoherent. It's satisfying. Nairobi was listening with that quality, the full, attending quality. How old are you? He asked. 24. Something moved in his expression. You're good, he said, simply, without hedging, the way he said things in conference rooms when he was moving directly to the point. You're better than any junior analyst I've worked opposite in the past 5 years. I want you to know I think that since we've been at each other's throats professionally for 8 months. A pause. I was going to say since I've been adversarial. Same thing. Perhaps, he was almost smiling. Leo had never seen him actually smile, and had developed a theory that it was a rare occurrence that would be disproportionately significant if witnessed. I want you to know I think that, regardless of the professional situation. Leo sat with this for a moment. He received it, trying to receive it cleanly, without the tangle of everything else. You're good. He'd been told he was good before. He'd been told it by people he respected. He had not been told it by Ezra Nairobi, and the experience of being told it by Ezra Nairobi was disorienting in a way he needed to think about later. Thank you, he said. You're also, Nairobi stopped. Leo looked at him. What? Nothing, he picked up his glass. It doesn't belong in a professional context. We're not in a professional context, Leo said. We're in a hotel bar during a blackout. The context is, he gestured at the room, the storm, the strange amber dark, this. Nairobi considered this with the particular seriousness he brought to everything. He said, you argue from a particular position sometimes, as if you have a personal stake in the argument beyond the professional one. I've noticed it for 8 months and I've been trying to account for it. I thought perhaps it was competitive aggression. Some analysts are like that in the first few years. The words landed with precision and weight. Leo's chest tightened. But it's more specific than that, Nairobi said. He was looking at the bar, not at Leo. It's directed, as if there's something about me specifically that you're arguing against. The bar was quiet, the ambient noise continued, but between them it was quiet in the way that certain moments are quiet, the way moments insist on being noticed. Leo held his glass, his hands were steady, which surprised him. There is, he said. Nairobi did not look at him. I thought so. I've known for 8 months. Known what? And there it was, the edge of it. He had been standing at this edge for 8 months, looking at the drop, telling himself there was no reason to go over, no useful outcome to it, no version of saying it that improved anything for anyone. He had told himself this repeatedly and with significant conviction, and he had been right, and he was drunk enough and tired enough and exhausted by the performance of not knowing enough that he no longer had the energy to stay back from the edge. "I have a brother," Leo said. "He's 11 years older than me." Nairobi was very still. "His name is Marcus. He had a relationship, a serious one for 2 years that ended badly." His voice was even. He was surprised by this. 3 years ago, the person he was with ended it in a way that, he paused, choosing the words, that didn't give Marcus the chance to understand why. And Marcus had. It was a very difficult time. "He's okay now. He's been okay for a while, but I watched him." He stopped. He looked at his glass. He said, "I watched someone I love very much fall apart, and I spent a long time being angry at the person responsible." The silence was very precise. He looked at Nairobi. Nairobi was looking at the bar surface, not away, not evading, looking with the quality of someone who is receiving something difficult and choosing to receive it rather than deflect it. "You know who I'm talking about," Leo said. Ezra Nairobi closed his eyes for 1 second, opened them. He was still looking at the bar. "Yes," he said, very quiet. The word dropped into the room like something heavy, something that displaced everything around it. Leo had thought about this moment for 8 months. He had thought about what he would feel: rage, satisfaction, the particular release of a long-carried weight. He had imagined himself furious, precise in his fury, laying it out with the technical accuracy he brought to everything. He had not imagined feeling this, a complicated, aching quiet, the anger present but not alone, not the loudest thing in the room anymore. "His name is Marcus Waters," Leo said. "He took my father's last name. Our parents divorced when I was 4. His voice was still even. "You didn't know?" "No," Nairobi said it with a simplicity that was, Leo thought, the barest minimum of honesty. Not excuse, not elaboration, just acknowledgement. "I didn't know." "I did, the first meeting, the vicar's deal." A long pause. 8 months, Nairobi said very quietly. 8 months. He waited for the defensiveness, for the professionalism to close over it, the controlled deflection. The careful repositioning he would have expected from any senior partner caught in this situation. He had prepared, without fully acknowledging that he'd been preparing, for this version of the conversation. It didn't come. What came instead was silence. Nairobi sat very still with his glass in front of him and was silent for long enough that Leo had begun to think the conversation was over, and then Nairobi said, "I owe you something. I don't know if you want it, but I owe you." He stopped. He began again. Marcus deserved an explanation. He deserved more than he got. Leo looked at him. The bar noise continued around them, oblivious. "He never told me your name," Leo said. "Just E." That's, Nairobi's voice was very quiet. That's very like him. The we of this, the fact that they both knew Marcus, that they were talking about the same person from different sides of the same wound, made the room suddenly very strange, very small. Leo got up. He didn't know what he needed. He crossed to the bar's front window and stood looking at the white nothing of the storm. He pressed one hand against the cold glass and felt the temperature on his palm. He was angry, but the anger was not clean, and it had not been clean for some time. It was tangled up with 8 months of proximity, and the way a person argued in a conference room, and the sound of a voice on a phone call, and the look in a doorway. It was tangled up with the fact that Nairobi had said, "I don't always like who I have to be to do it," in the most unguarded tone Leo had heard from him, and with the fact that he had looked at Leo just now, when Leo told him, and chosen stillness over defense. The storm went on. The cold came through the glass onto his palm. Behind him he heard the quiet displacement of weight, Nairobi getting up from the bar stool, his footsteps, unhurried, deliberate, crossing the bar. He stopped a few feet away from Leo, not crowding, not retreating, present. They stood at the window in the white storm of it. Chapter 7, Ezra. He had known when Leo said, "I have a brother," in the particular quality of the sentence, the weight it carried, the specific care of it, that whatever came next was going to reorganize things. He had known it before Marcus's name arrived, the way you know the shape of a room before the lights come on. Marcus. He had spent 2 years not allowing himself to think the name with any frequency. He had permitted himself the occasional, brief acknowledgement of the fact that he had done something badly, that he had hurt someone, that the person hurt had been specific and real and undeserving. He had permitted himself this and then moved back behind the boundary he maintained around the whole subject, which was the boundary of not looking, of forward motion, of the work that was always there to be done. Now he was standing at a hotel bar window, next to Marcus Waters' younger brother, and there was no boundary in range. He thought about Marcus. He let himself, for the first time in a long time, actually think about him. Marcus had been, he searched for the word, and the word that arrived was steady. In the 2 years they were together, Marcus had been the steadiest thing in Ezra's life. Not because he was simple. Marcus was not simple, had edges and depths and strong opinions and the particular emotional honesty of a person who had examined himself and was not afraid of what he found. But he was steady in the way that people who know what they want are steady, grounded, present, not requiring Ezra to perform or to be other than he was. This had been, Ezra understood now, the problem. Not a problem with Marcus, a problem with what Marcus's steadiness revealed about Ezra. He had not known when he was with Marcus how to be with someone in a way that left room for them to leave. He had not known how to love someone without constructing, simultaneously and secretly, the case for why that love was unsustainable. He had been 32 years old with the emotional musculature of someone who had never been taught that vulnerability was a skill, and the weight of what Marcus offered him had been too much, not in the sense of excess, in the sense that he couldn't hold it. And so he had done what he did with problems he could not solve. He had removed himself from them. He had ended it with the clean efficiency he brought to contract terminations, and he had watched Marcus's face absorb the information, and he had told himself that this was better for both of them, that Marcus would find someone who could fully meet what he offered, that his own inadequacy was the truest thing he could give someone he cared for. He had been, he understood now, in the process of understanding, wrong in a very specific way. He had made a decision about Marcus's needs without asking Marcus about his needs. He had unilaterally decided what was best for a situation that involved another person, without that other person's participation. He had done this in the name of care, and it had been, in practice, a failure of care. It had been fear dressed as consideration. He thought about this while standing at the window next to the younger brother of the man he had hurt, and the thinking was clear and cold, and not merciful to himself, which was correct. He turned from the window. Leo, he said. He had called him Waters in professional contexts. He had thought of him as Waters, but he had also for weeks thought of him as Leo, and it was Leo that came out now. Leo turned from the glass. His expression was contained, not closed. There was something in it that was waiting, Leo's particular quality of watchfulness. He deserved an explanation, Ezra said. He asked me why. I remember that he asked me why. And I couldn't give him an honest answer because the honest answer required me to say things about myself that I wasn't capable of saying at the time. He paused. He was aware that he was speaking more directly and more personally than he had spoken to anyone outside his own head in a very long time. He continued anyway. I told him it wasn't working. Which was true in the way that symptoms are true. Accurate descriptions of the surface of something whose causes are entirely different from what they appear. Leo was very still. What I was actually saying, Ezra said, was that I was afraid, that I had gotten close enough to someone that I could see how much losing him would cost me, and I preemptively removed the possibility. I ended it before it could end badly in a way that would. He stopped. He started again. I thought I was protecting him from the worst version of how it might end. I was protecting myself from the worst version of how it might begin. A silence. He didn't know that, Leo said. No. He spent a long time thinking he had done something wrong. This landed like a clean blow, specific and deserved. Yes, Ezra said. I know, I'm sorry. The word was inadequate. He knew it was inadequate and said it anyway, because the inadequate true thing was better than the sufficient false one. Leo was looking at him. The complicated expression, the one Ezra had been cataloguing for 8 months, had shifted, not into warmth, into something more like raw accuracy. As if Leo was seeing him clearly for the first time, without either the professional filter or the anger, and was deciding what the unmediated thing looked like. He's okay, Leo said. I want you to know that. He's genuinely okay. He has a partner, Jamie. He's happy. A pause. I'm not telling you because you deserve to feel better about it. I'm telling you because it's true and I don't want to. He stopped. I don't want to use his pain as a weapon. It's his. Ezra felt something shift in his chest, some specific, precise thing, the exact shape of what Leo had just done. That's, he said, and then stopped, because the only word that fit was generous, and he was not certain Leo would want that named. Don't, Leo said, not harshly, just simply, don't thank me for it. All right. They stood at the window. The storm continued its white work outside. Inside, the bar's amber warmth held them in something that was not comfort but was, perhaps, the possibility of it. Why didn't you say anything? Ezra said. 8 months. Leo made a sound, not quite a laugh. Because I didn't know what to say. Because there's no professional context for that conversation and I'm professional by default. Because, he paused. Because I wanted to be angry at you. Clean. I wanted to come into those rooms and just be cleanly furious at the person who hurt my brother. But Leo looked at him. His jaw was set, but his eyes were something else. The distance he maintained, the professional container, had worn through to something underneath. But you're not what I came in angry at, Leo said. You're not, I don't know, you're not the cartoon I needed. He looked away. That's not a compliment for the record. I know. It's just true. I understand. They were quiet for a moment. Then Leo said, with a kind of tired resignation, I'm going to need another drink. Yes, Ezra said, so am I. They went back to the bar. They sat closer than before, not close but closer, the geography of the evening having shifted them by small and irreversible degrees. The bartender appeared, they ordered. Leo drank his whiskey and Ezra drank his, and the storm kept pressing its white noise against the windows, and neither of them said anything for a while, and the not saying was different from conference room silence. It had a different quality. It was the silence of people who have said difficult things, and are sitting in the room with them rather than fleeing it. Ezra said eventually, how is he, really? Leo looked at him, assessing something, then apparently deciding, he's good. He runs a consulting practice from home education technology. He and Jamie have been together for 2 years, they're easy together. He laughs more than he used to. Pause. When I was 23 and he was falling apart, he laughed at nothing. I would call him and try to make him laugh, and he could manage it briefly, these small smiles, and then they'd disappear. Now it comes easily. He drank. That matters to me. It should, Ezra said. He still doesn't know, Leo said, that it's you that I know. Ezra absorbed this. Why? I didn't want to stir it up. He worked very hard to get where he is. The work of getting there was, I don't know if you can imagine, 3 years of actually putting something back together after that kind of thing. His voice was even, but something underneath it was not. I didn't want to reopen it. And then I was here and you were here and the deal was happening and I kept not saying it, and then more time passed and he made a small gesture. Here we are. Here we are. Ezra agreed. He said it and meant it with a weight that surprised him. The specific weight of being exactly where you are, in a moment you could not have predicted, with all its strange, particular truth. Leo looked at him again. Something in the look had changed. The edge of the anger was still there, would probably always be there in some form, but there was something else now too, curiosity. Real curiosity, the kind Leo turned on financial models and due diligence findings, the kind that was about actual understanding rather than about positioning. What are you afraid of? Leo asked. Right now, not 8 months ago. The question was so direct that Ezra's first impulse was to deflect it. His second impulse was to think about it honestly and respond to it honestly, which was unusual for him in this kind of conversation. But the night had already called for unusual things, and he was tired of his own careful management of information. That I'm going to end up at 50, having been very good at my work and not much else, he said. Leo was quiet. I know how to build things that last, Ezra said. Professionally, I've built something at Coldwell that will outlast my tenure there. I know how to do that. He held his glass. I'm less certain I know how to build anything else that lasts. Because you end it first. It was not a question. Ezra acknowledged it without flinching. Yes. That's, Leo said, and then stopped and looked at his whiskey and said, that's very honest. You asked directly. I didn't expect you to answer directly. You said the most honest thing you'd ever said when you told me Marcus's name, Ezra said. Reciprocity seemed appropriate. Something moved across Leo's face, something complicated, almost smile-adjacent, almost something else. He pressed his mouth together and looked back at the bar. Okay, he said. Okay, Ezra agreed. Outside, the storm reached what felt like its peak, a roar of wind that was audible even through the Aldrich's thick walls, a sound that was both enormous and somehow reassuring in its consistency. It was not getting worse. It was as bad as it was going to be, and it was doing that steadily, and you could feel that in the sound. Chapter 8, A Different Kind of Quiet. Later, they talked until the bar began to close. Not a hard close, the bar was staying open for the stranded hotel guests, but it was thinning, the bartender beginning the slow work of end-of-evening maintenance, and the room was shifting into a different quality of time. Later, the hours past midnight where things got quieter and truer, and you found out what you were made of. Leo had found out tonight what he was made of. The results were complicated. He had found out that the anger he'd carried for 3 years, the anger he'd sharpened and maintained and brought into conference rooms as a reliable tool, had not been for some time pure. It had other things in it. Things he had not been examining because examining them would have required him to examine other things that he was emphatically not ready to examine. Ezra Nairobi was sitting across from him at the bar and looking, for the first time in 8 months of professional interaction, like an actual person. Not a diminished person. He was still formidable, still the man who had walked into every negotiation they'd shared with the quality of someone who had already worked out the angles, but a human one. Tired and honest about being tired, working something out in real time that he'd been avoiding working out. Leo had not accounted for this. He had not budgeted for the possibility that Ezra Nairobi's worst quality, the coldness, the remove, the capacity to be with someone and simultaneously apart from them, was something he was fighting, not something he was comfortable with. He had not accounted for the possibility that the man he'd been angry at was angry at himself. They had talked after the revelations settled in a way that was sideways from what he expected. Not about Marcus, not circling back to the wound, about other things. The city, Leo's first year in Westhaven, the disorientation of it, the particular loneliness of a new city when you were 23 and had no established scaffolding and had to build everything from scratch. Ezra had moved to Westhaven at 22 for his clerkship, had spent 2 years learning the city alone. He knew, he said, the specific texture of that kind of loneliness. "You don't seem like someone who gets lonely," Leo said. It was a careful thing to say, careful not in the withholding way but in the genuine way, the way of saying something that might land badly and saying it anyway because it was true. "Everyone gets lonely," Nairobi said. "Most people are just unwilling to call it what it is." "What do you call it?" "Being unoccupied," a dry pause, poorly. Leo almost laughed. He was surprised by the almost. He had in his catalogue of the ways Ezra Nairobi could be, not fully accounted for the version that was, not funny exactly but wry, present, capable of a certain kind of dry self-knowledge. He thought about the Priya conversation, the question she'd asked, "Are you sure the thing you're feeling is hatred?" and thought about where he was now, at 1 a.m. in a hotel bar in a city that had stopped working, sitting closer to Ezra Nairobi than he had ever sat and not feeling the thing he had always felt in the man's proximity. He searched for it honestly, the way he'd been forcing himself toward honesty all night. He felt something like relief, and underneath the relief something else, quieter and more alarming, that he was going to need considerably more time to identify. "What happened with your father?" he asked. He wasn't sure why he asked it. It had surfaced in something Nairobi had said earlier, the shape of it there without the detail. Nairobi looked at him, not surprised, exactly, more like assessing whether the question was asked in the way it sounded, which was genuinely. It apparently passed the assessment. "Cancer," he said, "pancreatic. He was 54, I was 16. He said it with the particular flatness of someone who has said it many times and has learned to say it without flinching, which is its own form of grief. He paused. "He was a good man, I mean that without qualification. He was kind and he was present, and he loved my mother in a way that was visible. It was never hidden. Whatever room they were in together, you knew." Leo thought about his own parents, the opposite, the particular erosion of their affection, the way it had gone underground and then disappeared. He did not say this. "He died and I was 16, and there was nothing practical I could do about it," Nairobi said. "I have spent the subsequent 19 years doing things that are practical. I suspect these two facts are connected." "Yes," Leo said, "I suspect they are." They looked at each other for a moment. The bar, nearly empty now, a couple still at the far end, the bartender visibly winding down, was very quiet. "My parents divorced when I was 4, Leo said. "I barely remember them together. Marcus does. He was 15 when they split and it affected him differently. He absorbed it differently. He's always been someone who loved fully and then grieved fully when it ended. Very little middle ground." He paused. "I think I went the other direction. More careful, more managed." "And yet here you are," Nairobi said, "having told me the most significant piece of information you were carrying, without," he seemed to consider the word, "excessive management." "The whiskey helped." "The whiskey helped," he agreed. Leo laughed, a real one, brief, surprised out of him. Nairobi looked at him and something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, a small softening, barely there, but present. Leo thought, don't notice that. Don't put that into the catalogue. You have enough in the catalogue. He noticed it anyway. At some point it was past midnight. The details had grown pleasantly imprecise. They moved to a small table near the south window. The bar was closing its formal operations. The bar staff had put out the last call offerings and was consolidating behind the bar. The couple at the far end had gone. It was now only them and a man asleep in a chair across the room and the storm, which had shifted from roaring to a deep, sustained white presence outside the glass. They talked about books. This surprised Leo, not that Nairobi read, because of course Nairobi read. The man was a lawyer with a shelf full of books, but the specific books, the ones that mattered to him rather than the ones that sat on the shelf for credential. He liked history, not as narrative but as analysis, the why rather than the what. He had read Caro's volumes on Lyndon Johnson, with what Leo gathered was a kind of respect-tinged horror. He had reread Ellison twice. Leo had not read Ellison, he admitted this. You should, Nairobi said. It's one of those books that, he paused, looking for something. It tells you what you are in a way that doesn't ask your permission. That sounds uncomfortable. It is, that's why it matters. They talked about Leo's undergraduate years, the economics courses that had revealed themselves as home, the professors he'd had who treated their students as people worth arguing with, the thesis he'd written on behavioral factors in institutional investment that he was, at 24, still quietly proud of. Nairobi asked specific questions. He did not perform interest, he was actually interested, which was different and strange, and Leo found impossible to resist. At some point, Leo was not fully tracking the hour. Their hands were both on the table and they were close, and there was a moment where they were both looking at the storm-white window and Ezra's hand was very near Leo's hand and neither of them moved, and neither of them said anything about it, and the not saying was enormous. The space between their hands was approximately 2 inches, and it was the loudest 2 inches Leo had ever sat next to. He moved his hand, not away dramatically, just adjusted, reached for his water glass, let the moment dissolve. He did not look at Nairobi, he looked at the window. I should get a room, he said. I should have done that hours ago. The front desk will still have availability. Nairobi's voice was even. If the moment had registered, and Leo believed it had, because nothing escaped Ezra Nairobi's attention, there was nothing in his voice to confirm or deny it. Right, Leo stood. He gathered himself, his jacket from the back of the chair, his phone from the table, the various dispersed pieces of the person he was in public spaces. He was aware of being slightly unsteady, not drunk, not precisely, but in the particular state of a person who has said and heard and felt too much in a short period of time, and whose equilibrium is still recalibrating. Nairobi stood as well. Ezra was steady, as he was always steady, but there was a quality to the steadiness tonight that was different from its conference room version, a steadiness that included rather than excluded. Thank you, Leo said. He wasn't sure for what specifically, so he let it be general. I should say that, Nairobi said. What you told me tonight, you didn't have to. No, Leo agreed, I didn't. A pause. I'm glad you did, Nairobi said. The words were simple, they were enormous in the quiet. Leo looked at him. He looked at him with the full attention that he usually managed to redirect before it arrived at its destination, and Nairobi looked back, and the lobby of the Aldrich Hotel was very quiet, and the storm was a white presence at every window. Good night, Leo said. Good night, Nairobi said. He went to the front desk and booked a room and took the elevator to the 11th floor and let himself in and lay down on the hotel bed in his clothes and stared at the ceiling. He was in trouble. He had known he was in trouble for 6 weeks and had been telling himself the trouble was manageable. What he understood now, lying in the dark in his hotel clothes with the storm doing its white work outside and the night's conversations still moving through him, what he understood was that the trouble had grown significantly and was no longer something he was going to be able to manage with the tools he'd been applying to it. He thought about Marcus. He thought about the look on Marcus's face 2 years ago at his kitchen table. He thought about the words "it's really over," the flatness of them, the specific way Marcus had gone quiet in the months that followed. He thought about Ezra Nairobi saying he was afraid, saying he ended things before they ended him, saying this with a directness and a lack of self-pity that Leo, in some part of himself, he was not prepared to give a name to recognized. He thought about 2 inches of table. He thought about not moving. He closed his eyes. He thought, I need to go back to hatting him. He's the person who hurt my brother. He is not a person I can. He did not finish the thought. He fell asleep before he could. Chapter 9, the morning after, before anything. Ezra. He woke at 5, as he always did, and lay still for approximately 10 seconds while the previous night organized itself in his memory, not recovering the events exactly, but confirming that they had happened, that they were real, that he had sat in a hotel bar during a blackout and told Marcus's younger brother things he had not said aloud in 2 years. He got up, he showered. He stood at the window of his hotel room, different from the conference suite, smaller, with a view of the inner courtyard, and looked at the world. The storm had cleared. Outside was white and still and extraordinary. The city under fresh snow had a quality of hush, the way all cities do after snowfall, as if the snow has imposed a temporary grace on everything below it. The inner courtyard was untouched, 6 inches or 8 smooth, without footprints, catching the early grey light and holding it softly. A cleaning crew was visible at the far end of the courtyard, beginning the work of making paths. The city was waking up carefully, slowly, the way it always did after weather. He thought about Marcus. He thought about him without the management he'd been applying to those thoughts for 2 years, and what arrived was specific and detailed and not merciful to himself, but not self-flagellating either. He thought about what had actually happened, 2 years of something genuine, something that mattered, and then an act of cowardice dressed as decisiveness. He thought about Marcus asking why and Ezra not answering, and the understanding that this silence was not cruelty. He had not been cruel, but was nonetheless damage. He had known this, he had known it at the time, in the way that you can know something and simultaneously not let yourself know it fully. He was, he thought, beginning to let himself know it fully. The clarity of this was uncomfortable and also, strangely, a relief. The thing about guilt held at arm's length is that it requires constant maintenance. The guilt he had carried for 2 years, the vague, managed, not quite examined version, had cost him more energy than a clean reckoning would have. He was beginning to understand that. He dressed, he went down to the hotel restaurant at 6:30, which was when it opened, and ordered coffee and sat with it, while the restaurant slowly filled with other stranded guests making their cautious way back to the day. Leo came in at 7:15. He looked, Ezra thought, exactly as Ezra expected, like someone who had slept badly but had performed the morning routine anyway, the jacket and the organized face, and the carefully assembled presentation of readiness. His hair was a little less controlled than usual. The hotel had presumably not stocked the specific product he used, and it was doing something slightly unruly at the temples that Ezra catalogued and set aside. His eyes, when they found Ezra across the restaurant, had the quality of someone who had also been thinking about the previous night and was not certain of the protocol for the morning. Ezra raised his coffee cup, not a wave, just an indication. Leo came over and sat. "Morning," Leo said. "It's morning." A pause, the waiter appeared. Leo ordered coffee and something from the menu without appearing to read it, which suggested either that he knew the menu or that he wasn't particularly invested in the choice. "How are you?" Leo asked. It was a pleasantry, but it was also directed, a real question underneath the form. "Fine," Ezra said, and then, "Clearer than yesterday." Leo nodded. He received this without comment, which was the correct response. He understood, apparently, that clearer wasn't all clear, that it was a description of a direction rather than a destination. They drank their coffee. They did not for several minutes talk about the night before. This was also the correct response, Ezra thought. The night had said what it needed to say, and the morning didn't need to relitigate it. It needed to figure out what came next. What came next was the deal. This was the practical, useful, professional thing to attend to, and he attended to it. "The environmental clause," he said, "the revised version from yesterday's session." Leo's expression shifted, not relief exactly, but a kind of settling, the settling of someone who is also grateful to be on familiar ground. "The cap math came in overnight. James sent it to me. I saw it this morning. The numbers work." "They do," Ezra agreed. He had reviewed it on his phone before coming down. "I need to confirm with Victoria, but I think she'll accept it. The cap is defensible. Our side will need to run it past the LP committee, but the language is clean enough that it should be straightforward." Leo turned his coffee cup. "If both sides confirm by Thursday, we can schedule the signing for early next week." "Yes." Leo paused. "That's a good outcome, given where this was 3 days ago." "It is." The food arrived. They ate. The conversation stayed in the practical zone. Logistics, timeline, the next steps for each party. It was, Ezra thought, the most productive working conversation he and Leo had ever had, and the explanation for that was not primarily the deal or the revised clause or the cap math. It was that the air between them had been cleared of something that had been occupying it. Not everything, not by a long way, but something. At 8:30, Leo checked his phone and said the subway was running again and the roads were mostly clear, and Ezra said good, and Leo said I'll send you the confirmation memo when I have it, and Ezra said that works, and they stood from the table with the slightly careful politeness of people who have had an extraordinary night and are finding their way back to ordinary day. "Leo," Ezra said. He wasn't sure when he started what he was going to say. He finished the sentence, "What you told me last night, I won't use it." Leo looked at him. His expression was complicated and then less complicated. "I know," he said. "I didn't think you would." This landed with a weight that Ezra didn't immediately process. Leo had not thought he would. 8 months of professional hostility, the weight of what Ezra had done to his brother, and Leo's read of him was, "I know you won't." He was still sitting with that in the car. His driver had managed to get through carefully, the snow-plowed streets slowly coming clear as they moved through the white, quieted city. He was sitting with it in his office at 10, where Delia had arrived with coffee and the accumulated messages, and an expression that said she had read his face correctly and knew that something had shifted. He was sitting with it at noon when he called Victoria Chen and walked her through the revised clause, and she said, after a moment's consideration, "Let's close this deal." He was sitting with it at 6, when he cancelled his last 2 afternoon meetings, not because of an emergency, just because he had reached the point where additional work would be addition rather than progress, and went home. His apartment. He stood in the kitchen with the lights on and the city outside his windows and ate something he'd assembled without particular attention and thought about the night. He thought about Leo at the window, one hand on the cold glass, the set of his jaw, and the thing underneath the set of his jaw. He thought about Leo saying, "You're not what I came in angry at." He thought about 2 inches of table. He was careful here in his own accounting. He had not taken the moment further than it was. He had not acted on the thing that the space between their hands represented, which was the correct behavior, the professional behavior, the behavior appropriate to a situation in which the history was what it was, and the professional relationship was what it was. He had also, and he was honest about this in the privacy of his own thinking, not moved his hand away. He poured a glass of water and drank it, and looked at the city and thought about what it would mean to want something that complicated. Something that had this much history attached to it, this much reason for caution, this much potential for damage to more than just himself. He thought about his father. He thought about his father's hand, automatic and sure, finding his mother's in any room they shared. He did not call anyone. He went to bed at 9, which was early for him. He lay in the dark of his own bedroom and thought, with the clarity that sometimes came at the edge of sleep, you are going to have to make some decisions. He was not yet ready to make them. He was ready to know they needed to be made, which was further along than yesterday. He slept. Chapter 10, trying to go back. Later. The normal lasted approximately 4 days. He got back to his apartment on the Wednesday morning after the storm, and changed his clothes, and went to work and was professionally excellent, and did not think about the Aldrich Hotel or the bar or the white storm or the 2 inches of table. He did not think about these things with focused effort, which meant he thought about them constantly, in the background, the way a song stays in your head after the music stops. Priya looked at him when he came in and said, "There's a story here," and he said, "There's no story," and she said, "Leo," and he said, "Please can we talk about literally anything else?" And she admirably said, "Fine, for now," and let him work. He confirmed the CAP math. He sent the confirmation memo to Nairobi's team, to James formally, copied to Nairobi, and the response came from James with confirmation that Victoria Chen had signed off. The deal was back on track. The signing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. He called Marcus on Thursday evening. "Hey," Marcus said, still the easy quality, the voice that had learned to carry ordinary things without strain. "Hey, just checking in. You called 2 days ago." "I know, he stopped, he restarted. "I wanted to hear your voice." A pause, Leo, gentle the way Marcus did gentle things. "What's going on?" "Nothing, he sat on his couch in the dark of his apartment and thought about what was actually going on, which was, I know who he is. I've been sitting across from him for 8 months. We spent a night in a hotel bar during a blackout and he told me he was afraid and I told him about you and now I don't know what I'm doing. Work stuff," he said. "The deal's closing. It was complicated for a while." "But it's closing now." "Yes." "Then that's good." "Yes," he leaned back. "You sound good." "I am good," said without performance. "Jamie got his class a visiting artist this week, this sculptor from the university. He's been talking about it every evening, his face. Leo could hear the warmth in it, the quality of loving someone who is enthusiastic. He's such a good teacher." "He is," Leo agreed. He had seen Jamie teach once, at an open studio event at the school, had watched the kids respond to his particular energy, and understood why Marcus had fallen in love with it. "You sound different," Marcus said, quiet, observational. "I'm tired." "Different tired." He closed his eyes. "I'm working something out." "Okay, no push, just okay. Do you want to talk about it?" "Not yet." "Okay, when you do." "Yeah." They talked about other things. After they hung up, Leo sat in the dark of his apartment and held the phone and thought about his brother's voice, steady, warm, carrying ordinary things without strain, and thought about what it had cost to get to that voice, and what he owed Marcus by way of not doing things that could disturb it. He did not know if any of what was happening fell into the category of things that could disturb it. He did not know what was happening, precisely. He knew that something was happening, that it had been happening for longer than the hotel bar, and that calling it hatred had stopped being accurate, and he hadn't found another word for it yet. On Friday, Nairobi called. He was at his desk, mid-afternoon, mid a report on a different deal. His phone lit up with the name, Nairobi, Ezra, in his contacts under the formal designation he had assigned to all professional contacts. He looked at it for 2 rings. He answered. Waters, Nairobi said, using his last name in the professional way, and Leo felt the odd doubling of the man's voice. The voice from the phone call, precise and measured, and the voice from the bar, the same precision but different underneath it. Nairobi, he matched the formality. The closing memo has a term in Section 4 that I want to revisit before Tuesday. A pause. Are you available to discuss it now, or would you prefer a call tomorrow morning? Now is fine. He pulled up the closing memo on his screen. Section 4, the rep and warranty insurance trigger. Yes, the language on the timing mechanism is ambiguous. It could support either side's interpretation, and I'd like to agree on the intent before we sign rather than leave it to dispute resolution. This was the correct call. This was a genuine issue that should be addressed. He looked at the language and saw immediately what Nairobi meant. A date trigger that could be read as beginning from close or from the first day of the insurance policy. A difference of 6 days that would seem trivial until it wasn't. They worked through it, efficiently, without friction. Nairobi proposed language. Leo reviewed it and suggested a modification. Nairobi accepted the modification. 23 minutes beginning to end and the term was resolved. Then Nairobi said, and the shift was slight but Leo caught the half-beat pause before, "How are you doing?" He looked at his desk, his screen, his coffee gone cold. He thought about the correct answer, the professional answer, and then thought about the bar and what they'd agreed there, even if they hadn't exactly agreed it in words, which was that professional performance was one thing and honesty was another, and the distinction mattered. "Fine," he said, then, "better than I expected to be." A pause. "Yes," Nairobi said, "same." Another pause, not awkward, something else, the kind of pause that has content in it. "The deal's in good shape," Leo said. "Yes. Tuesday should be straightforward." "I think so." One more pause, then Nairobi said, and it was very quiet and very deliberate, "Get some sleep, Waters." He hung up before Leo could respond. Leo sat with the phone in his hand for 20 minutes. He was aware that this was an unreasonable amount of time to sit with a phone after a professional call. He sat with it anyway. "Get some sleep, Waters." 3 words, an instruction, the kind of thing a colleague might say, not unkindly, at the end of a working call. Also, not what you said to someone who was merely a professional counterpart. You said take care at the end of professional calls, or thanks, or talk soon. You said get some sleep to people you were concerned about, people you were paying attention to. He put the phone on his desk. He looked at the screen. He looked at the ceiling. He understood, not going back to normal. He had tried and the thing had not cooperated, and what he was left with was the knowledge that the original categories, hatred, opposition, the clean anger that had organized the past 8 months, were no longer operative, and he didn't have replacement categories yet. He thought about Priya's question, "Are you sure the thing you're feeling is hatred?" "No," he thought, clearly and for the first time without immediately retreating. "No, I'm not sure about that at all." He went back to his report. Chapter 11, Proximity. Ezra. The deal closed on Tuesday at 11 in the morning. Victoria Chen signed in the Aldrich Hotel's second-floor boardroom. They had used it before and it was, by now, a familiar room, and Graham Sachs countersigned on behalf of the consortium. And there were handshakes and the careful warmth of a negotiation resolved, the shared relief of people who had almost not gotten here and had. Ezra shook Victoria's hand and she said quietly, "Thank you," and he received it and the deal was done. The signing was attended by both full teams, 12 people in total, a catered lunch afterward in the same room, a celebration that was modest and professional and in its modest professionalism, genuine. 4 months of work, 2 public complications, 1 blackout, and a deal that had been genuinely uncertain 10 days ago and was now complete. He stayed for the lunch. He talked to Victoria's CFO and to Graham and to one of Meridian's senior associates who had worked hard on the CAP math. He moved through the room with the easy precision he had developed for professional social events, present, attentive, not performing but also not revealing. He was aware of Leo across the room at all times. This was not a choice, it was information that arrived without his requesting it. Leo was talking to Sophia Reyes, Ezra's associate. They were, apparently, having a genuine conversation. Leo was making a point about something, gesturing slightly, and Sophia was listening with the engaged attention she brought to things that interested her. Leo was relaxed in the room in a way he had not been in the first sessions. The contained aggression he'd brought to those meetings was absent, and in its absence something else was visible, the quality he'd shown in the hotel bar, present, warm at its core, genuinely engaged with the person in front of him. Ezra watched this for approximately 30 seconds and then stopped watching it, because 30 seconds was the reasonable limit. He finished his coffee, he said his professional goodbyes, he left. The deal was done. There was no professional reason to be in contact with Meridian. No clause to negotiate, no document to review, no reason for a call or an email or a room shared for a purpose. The structure that had organized his proximity to Leo Waters for 4 months had concluded. He was aware of this in his body in a way that was specific and inconvenient, a quality of absence, of something that had been in the room and was now not. He dealt with it the way he dealt with most inconvenient things, by working. He returned to the office. He picked up the 2 new matters his associates had been moving forward without him. He took 3 client calls and had a conversation with James about a preliminary engagement letter for a new transaction in the healthcare space. He did not call Leo. There was no reason to call Leo. He filed this fact and moved on. The absence lasted 12 days before both firms' managing partners arranged what they called a cross-firm working group on a new matter that, in its structure, required Caldwell and Nairobi to work with Meridian's analysis team for due diligence support. Ezra received this assignment on a Thursday afternoon and read the email twice. He would be working with Leo Waters again. He considered whether this was. He searched carefully for the accurate word, welcome. He found that it was. He found that this finding was something he needed to sit with for a while before he did anything about it. He didn't do anything about it. He sent the preliminary engagement memo to James and copied the Meridian contact named in the email, which was not Leo, which was a junior analyst named Tors. He kept the correspondence professional and structural and did not initiate anything. The first joint working session for the new matter was on the following Tuesday, in a conference room at Caldwell in Nairobi, which meant that Meridian came to him. He arrived early, as always. James had the room set up, files, coffee, the practical machinery of a working session. At 9 the Meridian team arrived, Tors, another analyst, and Leo. Leo came in with the same professional composure as always, but the composure had a different quality than it had carried in the Kellerman sessions, lighter, perhaps less armored. He acknowledged Ezra with a nod that was the same as their previous nods in that it was brief and precise, and different in that it was not quite the managed neutrality he had deployed in the early sessions. There was something in it that was personal, not inappropriate, just honest. Ezra returned the nod. They sat on their respective sides of the table, and the session began. They were working on a healthcare services acquisition, smaller than Kellerman, more legally complex, with an ownership structure that required careful tracking through 3 holding companies. Leo's role was due diligence analyst, pulling financial records, verifying representations, building the model that would support the purchase price. He was, Ezra observed again, excellent at this. The precision of his work, the way he organized the data, the questions he asked, the way his eye caught a discrepancy in a subsidiary's accounts and flagged it without waiting to be prompted, was genuinely impressive. Ezra had said as much once in the Aldrich Hotel bar, and meant it, and it was no less true in the sober light of a conference room. There was also, in the conference room, the thing that was not about the work. It was present in the moments between the work, when the associates were cross-referencing documents, and Ezra and Leo were briefly both at rest. In the way Leo's attention moved through the room, and then returned to Ezra with the quality of something pulled by gravity rather than chosen. In the way Ezra found himself, with increasing frequency, aware of where in the room Leo was as a kind of ambient fact, the way you are aware of weather, not attending to it constantly but always knowing. He did not examine this carefully. He examined it enough to know it existed, and then set it aside and worked. The third session ran long past 6 in the evening, just the 2 of them, the associates having finished their work and gone. It was a natural outcome. The ownership structure had revealed a complication in the third holding company that required a more careful analysis than the original due diligence scope had contemplated, and they were both the right people to think through the implications. Ezra was reading the LLC agreement. Leo was building a supplemental model, laptop open, headphones around his neck. He'd put them on at some point in the afternoon and taken them off when the session reconvened, and they sat now at a slight angle, a detail that Ezra had noted without meaning to. They were bent over the same document, a printed version, the LLC agreement, which Leo had annotated in the margins with the small, precise handwriting that Ezra had begun to recognize. Ezra had his own copy, Leo had his. They had ended up, at some point in the past hour, reviewing Leo's copy because it had a note in the margin of Section 8 that was relevant, and reading it from Leo's copy was more efficient than Leo describing the note, and Ezra finding the same page in his own copy. Leo was pointing to a paragraph and talking, explaining his read of the waterfall provision, the way it interacted with the third company's preferred unit structure. His voice had the quality it had when he was working through something he found genuinely interesting, an aliveness in it, a focused energy. If the preferred units are treated as equity for this purpose, Leo said, then the waterfall doesn't contemplate them specifically, which means there's an argument that they participate in the distribution ahead of the common. Which Meridian doesn't want, Ezra said. Which nobody wants because it complicates the purchase price by an amount that's, Leo checked his model, about 3.5 million if we're being optimistic. And if we're being accurate. 4.2. They were both looking at the page. They were, Ezra noted, not very far apart. The conference room had contracted to its essentials, the document, the model, the problem, and the problem required proximity, and the proximity was. There's a cure, Leo said, looking up. He looked up directly at Ezra, who was also looking up, and for a moment they were very close, looking at each other, the problem between them but also beneath them now. Yes, Ezra said, his voice was even. Amendment to the LLC agreement before close. Which they'll negotiate. Probably, but the alternative is more expensive. Leo held his gaze for a moment, then he looked back at the document. Right. They went back to the work, but the moment, brief, practically nothing, two people looking up from the same page, was in the room now, added to the accumulation of such moments. At 6:30, Leo said something. He was looking at his model, not at Ezra, his voice carefully neutral. This is going to take another hour at least. I know. We could split it, take our respective parts, and reconvene tomorrow. Or we could finish it now and have clean documentation for Thursday's session. A pause. Okay, Leo said. There was something in the okay, barely there, not performing anything, just present. Then, do you want more coffee? Yes. Leo went to the sideboard and poured 2 cups and came back and set one in front of Ezra and sat down, and they worked for another hour and a half, and the room got quieter as the building emptied around them, and neither of them mentioned the moment above the LLC agreement, and neither of them forgot it. It was the 7th session when Leo said something that surprised him. They were at the end of the day, 5 o'clock, the associates gone, the room slightly disordered with the evidence of a full day's work. They had solved the holding company problem, drafted the amendment language, and built the model that supported the revised purchase price. It was good work. Ezra was aware of this in the particular, quiet satisfaction that good work produced in him. Leo was closing his laptop. He made some small sound that was not quite a laugh, the sound of someone who has had a long day and has arrived at the far side of it with something resembling ease. Then he said, "Did you know you laugh differently when you're actually surprised by something?" Ezra looked at him. Earlier, Leo said, not looking up from his laptop, when Tors read out the typo in the amendment draft. You laughed before you corrected it, and it was. He clicked the laptop shut. Different. Different how? Real. Leo looked at him then sideways, with the half-careful quality he brought to observations that were personal rather than professional. The professional laugh, you have one of those. It's polite. It signals acknowledgement. This one was just, you found it funny. Ezra thought about this, about being seen, specifically seen, in the unremarkable moment of an unremarkable response. He said, Tor's typo was genuinely funny. It was, Leo agreed, the word penal where panel should be as a gift. A beat, then Ezra laughed, the real kind, not the acknowledgement kind, a brief and genuine thing, and Leo looked at him with an expression that was warm in a way Leo's expressions had only recently in this context been warm. Ezra felt something land in his chest, specific, warm, not unpleasant. He looked at his watch. He looked at the window, the city outside, the late afternoon grey. Are you going to keep doing that? Leo asked. Doing what? Looking at your watch when you need to stop looking at me. The question was direct, in the way Leo was direct when he had decided to be, and Ezra had the experience he sometimes had in this man's presence of the floor briefly tilting. He recovered it. I look at my watch when I need to leave, he said. Sure, Leo said, in the tone of someone who does not believe this. They gathered their things, they left the conference room. In the elevator, going down, they stood in the way that people stand in elevators when they are both aware of the other person's presence and choosing not to acknowledge it, facing forward, the width of the elevator between them. The elevator descended. It opened on the lobby. They walked out into the early evening. The city was in its post-work density, foot traffic thick on the pavements, the crosswalks full. They stood on the step outside the Hale building. Subway, Leo asked. Car, Ezra said, but I can walk to the car. Which direction? South. I'm east. This was the moment to say good night, to turn in their respective directions, to execute the clean separation of a professional day concluded. He was aware of this. Leo was apparently aware of this, because he was also standing there rather than turning east. The model's good, Leo said, after a moment. Yes, Ezra agreed. I think Thursday's session will be relatively clean. I think so. Another pause. The city moved around them with its customary indifference. Get home safely, Ezra said. He said it deliberately, the echo of get some sleep, the same register. Leo looked at him, he caught it, he always caught things. You too, he said. He turned east. Ezra turned south. He walked to his car with the particular awareness of someone who has been in a contained space for 9 hours and is stepping out into the world and finding it larger than expected, and the specific, quiet knowledge that he was going home to think about the person walking east, and that this had been true for 3 weeks now, and was becoming more true rather than less. He got in the car, he sat there. He thought, I'm going to need to make a decision about this. He made no decision, he went home. Chapter 12. He was not supposed to know that Ezra got to the office at 7:15. He knew because he had been there once at 7:45, coming in early on a Kellerman day, needing to review materials before the session, and had seen the light on in the Caldwell and Nairobi corner offices, the upper floors of the Hale building visible from the street, and had thought, he's already here. That was 3 months ago. Now he thought about it again, and thought about it too much, which was characteristic of how he was currently thinking about most things related to Ezra Nairobi. He was noticing things. This was the problem. He had been noticing things for longer than he wanted to admit, and the noticing had accelerated since the hotel, since the night that had removed the clean anger and replaced it with something that required considerably more maintenance. He noticed the way Nairobi held his pen, not writing but turning it between his fingers when he was thinking, the motion so habitual and contained that he probably didn't know he did it. The way he always had water on the table rather than coffee in the afternoon sessions, the coffee reserved for mornings, a pattern Leo had clocked across 12 sessions without deciding to. The way he said the associates' names, James, Sophia, Tors, with equal weight and equal respect, no performance of warmth but no hierarchy either, just their names, like they were simply people worth addressing accurately. The way his voice in the working sessions had a quality of focus that was not the same quality as his voice at the bar in the storm, and how Leo had learned to hear the difference between them and what the difference meant. He knew too much. He had been accumulating this knowledge without permission, or rather, without the conscious decision that constituted real permission, and it was an enormous amount of data, and none of it was helping. He called Priya from his apartment on a Sunday evening. I need to tell you something, he said. Okay, she said, in the tone she used when she was setting aside whatever she'd been doing to actually listen. He told her, the full version, Marcus, the divorce and the different last name, 8 months of knowing, the hotel, the conversation at the bar, the 12 days of absence and then the new deal and the 7 sessions, the LLC agreement, the laugh. Priya was quiet for a long time after. Leo, she said. I know. You have been carrying this for 8 months, yes. Leo, she said it with the particular quality that conveyed, I am saying your name because you are being ridiculous and I love you. You are in love with Ezra Nairobi. I'm not. You know every beverage he drinks at every hour of the working day. You have described his handwriting to me using the word precise on 3 separate occasions. You know when he gets to work. That's observation, not. Later, he sat on his couch in the Sunday quiet of his apartment and thought about the LLC agreement and 2 inches of table and get home safely and the laugh that was real. I'm not in love with him, he said. It's more like. What? It's like I've been angry at him for 3 years, using Marcus as the reason, and the anger was real but it was also. He stopped. He started again. I think I was also angry at him because I don't know how to say this accurately because I understand why Marcus loved him. And I didn't want to understand that. It felt disloyal. And now the anger's gone and what's underneath it is. Is what? He closed his eyes, something I don't know what to do with. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then carefully, do you think he? I don't know. Leo, the man said, get home safely to you like a person who has feelings. That could be professional courtesy. Has he ever said it to your Meridian colleagues? He thought about this. He thought about the sessions and the elevator and the step outside the Hale building and the respective directions they walked. No, he said. Okay, Priya said, in the tone of someone who has made their point and is waiting for the other person to catch up. He thought about Marcus. He always thought about Marcus here. When he arrived at this point in his own thinking, Marcus who was okay, who had Jamie who was steady. He thought about the kitchen table and the mug and the 3 years of rebuilding. He thought about what he owed his brother, by way of caution if nothing else. I need to see Marcus, he said. He drove out on a Saturday, the drive he knew, 4 hours on the interstate, then the smaller roads, then Marcus's neighborhood, the suburb that had trees and streets with actual sidewalks and a quality of settled domesticity that Leo found simultaneously comforting and faintly alien. Jamie opened the door. He was in paint-stained jeans and a sweater, which was his standard weekend state. He always seemed to have paint somewhere, a quality Leo had come to associate with people who were genuinely living in their interests rather than performing them. He was warm, unreservedly, in the way he was warm with everyone, something about him that simply gave you the impression of being welcomed. Marcus is making lunch, he said, which means there are approximately 3 ingredients on the counter, and he's been there for 45 minutes. That's accurate, Leo said, following him in. Marcus was indeed in the kitchen cutting board, 3 ingredients, the particular focused expression of a man for whom cooking required full commitment. He looked up when Leo came in and smiled, the easy smile, the smile with the room in it that he'd had for 2 years now. Leo felt every time the specific relief of seeing it. He would never stop being relieved by it. Hey, Marcus said, give me 12 minutes. Take your time. He sat at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table he'd sat at 3 years ago with a mug of tea and the flat words "it's really over," and watched his brother make lunch, and Jamie moved around the kitchen with the unthinking ease of someone who had navigated this space with Marcus for long enough that it was shared territory, and the room was ordinary and warm and full of the specific texture of people who were happy together in the unremarkable, persistent way. After lunch, Marcus had improved significantly, which Jamie confirmed was not due to his own instruction but Marcus's blood-mindedness. Jamie excused himself to the studio. He had a project. The studio was a converted sunroom at the back of the house that Marcus had given over to it without apparent hesitation. It was, Leo thought, one of the quietly significant things about them, that Marcus had given the best room in the house to Jamie's work. They sat in the kitchen with coffee post-lunch, the afternoon light coming through the windows at a low angle. Marcus put his mug down and said, Okay. Okay, what? Whatever you came to say. I've been watching you since you walked in and you have something. Leo looked at his coffee. He looked at the kitchen. He thought about how to say it and decided that direct was the only way. I've been working with Ezra in Nairobi, he said. Marcus went very still. For 4 months, a deal, 2 deals, we've been across from each other on transactions. He kept his voice level. I knew from the first session. Different last name, he didn't make the connection. I didn't tell him until he paused. 2 weeks into the first deal, there was a night, a blackout, we were stuck, I told him. A silence. He knows, Marcus's voice was careful, measured. He knows, I know. Leo stopped. He said you deserved an explanation and he was sorry. Not to me on your behalf, I think just because it needed to be said aloud and I was the person it could be said to. He held his coffee. He didn't ask me to pass it on. I'm telling you because I think you should know, not because he asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He was looking at the table. Then he looked up and Leo was watching his face carefully, and what was in it was complicated, layered. The thing he had been afraid of, the reopened wound, the disruption of the hard-won equilibrium, was not entirely absent, but it was not the dominant thing. How is he? Marcus asked. His voice was even. Leo blinked. What? Ezra, how is he? He hadn't expected this question. He thought about it honestly. He thought about the pen turning between fingers, the 7:15 arrival, the real laugh. He's working a lot. He stopped. He started differently. I think he's been alone for a long time and he's okay with it, and he's also not okay with it, if that makes sense. Marcus looked at him. Something moved through his expression, complex and specific. The kind of recognition that belongs to people who have loved someone and therefore know them in ways that survive the relationship. Yes, he said quietly, that makes sense. They sat with it. Then Marcus said, is there something going on with you and Ezra? Leo felt the blood move in his face. He was, he thought, not a person who blushed easily, and this was an inconvenient moment to discover the exceptions. No, he said, it's professional. Marcus looked at him with the patient, specific look of an older brother who is not stupid. Okay, he said. Marcus. I'm not angry at him, Leo, he said it quietly. For a long time it was a particular kind of anger that had a particular kind of exhaustion to it, but I've done the work. I've had 3 years in good therapy in Jamie, and he moved his mug on the table. I'm not interested in carrying that anymore, it was already down. He paused. I just want to know you're okay. I'm okay, Leo said. Are you sure? He thought about Priya's question. Are you in love with Ezra Nairobi? He thought about the 2 inches of table, and the real laugh, and the 7:15 light in the window of a building he'd happened to be passing. I'm working something out, he said. Marcus nodded. He reached across the table and gripped Leo's forearm, briefly, a touch that was what it was. I see you, I'm here. You know you can tell me things, he said. It's not going to break me. Leo looked at his brother. At the steady face, the easy eyes, the man who had put himself back together and done it all the way. I know, Leo said, I'm just not ready yet. Okay, Marcus released his arm, when you are. He drove home in the late afternoon, the highway wide and grey, the suburbs giving way to the city. He thought about Marcus saying I'm not angry at him. He thought about the weight he had been carrying on his brother's behalf and the fact that Marcus, who was the actual subject of it, had put it down. He thought, maybe I've been carrying something for Marcus that Marcus put down a long time ago. The anger had organized so much. It had organized how he understood the past 3 years, how he understood his time in Westhaven, how he understood his relationship to the work, how he understood Ezra Nairobi. Without it as a frame, the picture he was left with was different, and the most frightening thing about it was not the picture itself, but what he was looking at Ezra Nairobi with now, when there was no anger in the way. He drove into the city. The lights came up as the dark came down. He thought, I have no idea what to do with this. He went home. He sat in his apartment and did not call Priya and did not call Marcus and did not call anyone, because the thing he was working out was at the point where other people's voices would not help it along. He sat in his own quiet and thought about it, and did not arrive at an answer, and went to bed without one. The not having an answer felt different from a month ago. A month ago it had felt like a problem to be solved. Now it felt like a space he was learning to stand in. This was, he thought, either progress or denial. He couldn't yet tell which. Chapter 13, What He Allows. Ezra. The dinner was not his idea. It was Claire Caldwell's idea, implemented through the managing partner's office as a cross-firm relationship-strengthening dinner for the 2 teams that had successfully closed the Kellerman deal. Claire believed in relationship cultivation with the same conviction she brought to everything, strategically, persistently, and with budget allocated. A restaurant in the financial district, the private dining room, the kind of event that looked social but was professionally legible. Ezra went because he went to everything Claire organized. He had never successfully argued with Claire on any scheduling matter. She had a particular ability to make things seem simultaneously optional and not, a quality he recognized as a form of genuine skill. He arrived, as always, a few minutes before the arranged time. The private dining room at Vara was wood-paneled and warm and lit with the specific amber that made everyone look better than they did in office lighting, a fact Ezra had noticed before and noted again now as the Meridian team filtered in. Graham, animated as always, the Meridian senior associates, whom Ezra knew well enough to converse easily with. Tors, who had turned out to be genuinely good at his work, and easier to like than the Kellerman tension had initially allowed. And Leo, in a jacket that was not the suit jacket, softer, less formal, the kind of thing you wore when you were going out rather than going to work. He was talking to Graham when he came in, leaning slightly against the door frame in a way that suggested ease, and he laughed at something Graham said, a real laugh, one of the ones Ezra had learned to distinguish, and then his eyes moved through the room and found Ezra's and something in them shifted, subtly. He raised his glass slightly. Ezra inclined his head. They were not near each other. They moved around the room separately, the social physics of an event like this distributing people across conversations. Ezra talked to Graham about a litigation trend that was affecting M&A deal structures. He talked to the Meridian senior associate about a mutual acquaintance in the private equity world. He talked to Victoria Chen's CFO, who had been invited as a gesture of goodwill, about the company's integration timeline. He was good at this, he had learned to be good at it, which was different. It had required practice and intention rather than coming naturally, and some evenings it felt more like a performance than others. Tonight it felt less like a performance than usual. He couldn't account for this. At some point in the natural drift of a dinner party, he ended up at the far end of the table, and Leo ended up there too. The seating was not arranged, at least not by him, but these things had a way of happening that was not quite accidental. They were at the last two seats, with Graham and one of the Meridian associates on Leo's other side, engrossed in a conversation about a different deal, and the rest of the room was well occupied, and Ezra and Leo were side by side, almost, the geometry of the table placing them at a slight angle to each other. "These events are interesting," Leo said. He was looking at the room with the observational quality he had, the way he took in spaces, absorbed them. "Claire believes in them. Do you?" He considered this. "I believe in the things they produce," he said. "Whether the events themselves are the most efficient mechanism is a different question." "What do they produce?" "The experience of having been in the same room as someone for a social purpose, which is different from a professional one, even if the distinction is slim." He picked up his wine. "People who have eaten dinner together argue differently than people who haven't." Leo turned to look at him. The lamp at their end of the table caught the amber in his eyes. He had brown eyes, dark, with a quality of warmth in certain light that was the kind of thing Ezra had catalogued and tried not to. "Do you mean argue like professionally argue?" "Yes." "That's true," Leo said. "I've noticed that." A pause. "I've also noticed that you specifically seem less inclined to hold ground for its own sake once you've seen someone outside of work. You adjust for who they actually are." This observation surprised him, not because it was wrong, because it was accurate in a way that indicated something about how closely Leo had been watching him. "I've been told I'm difficult to read," Ezra said. "You are," Leo said, "by most people." He looked at his glass. "I've had a lot of time to study the edges." The words landed with a weight that the room around them did not seem to register, but that Ezra felt very clearly. 8 months of professional opposition, of Leo watching him across tables, finding the edges of the person behind the control. "What have you found?" Ezra asked. He asked it seriously, as a genuine question. Leo thought about it, "that you're not what you look like from the outside. The outside is," he searched for it, "impenetrable is the word most people use, but it's not impenetrable, it's just that the entrances aren't where people expect them." A pause. "Where are they?" Ezra asked. He was aware that he was asking something personal and asking it directly, which was not typical of him in any context. Leo looked at him. "The work," he said. "When the problem is real and interesting, you're completely present, not just competent, present." And there he stopped. He started differently. "When you laugh, when something actually surprises you into it." He thought about Tor's typo. He thought about the small laugh in the hotel bar, the way it had arrived before he chose it. "I should be more careful," he said, and he said it wryly, not meaning it, or not entirely. Leo did something with his mouth, not a smile exactly, more the predecessor of one. "Please don't be," he said. The room around them continued its dinner party work, the low noise of a dozen conversations, the sound of silverware, and the gentle presence of food and wine. Ezra was aware of all of it as a kind of periphery, and of the conversation at this end of the table as the center. "Tell me something about the first week," he said, "at Meridian." Leo blinked, then, "Why?" "I'm curious." He said it simply, because it was simple. He was curious. He had been curious about Leo Waters in ways that had nothing to do with the professional situation for quite some time. Leo leaned back slightly into memory. "The first week, I got lost, comprehensively lost on the second day. The Halcyon Tower has 3 different elevator banks, and I took the wrong one and ended up on the 37th floor, which is where Meridian's litigation group is, which I didn't know existed. And there was a board meeting in progress, and he paused. The predecessor of a smile arrived more fully. I walked in. Because the door was open, and I didn't see the meeting in progress fast enough, and then once I was in, I thought leaving immediately would be more visible than staying." "So you stayed?" "I sat down at the end of the conference table, and I opened my laptop, and I nodded along for 40 minutes, and then the meeting ended, and a partner asked who I was, and I said I was the new analyst in the equity group, which was true, and she said wrong floor, and I said I knew and left." Ezra laughed, the real kind, the kind Leo had identified at Tor's expense, arriving before the choice. Leo watched him with the expression he had in the hotel bar when something was being given, the attending, taking care quality. You have a good laugh, he said quietly, as if he hadn't entirely meant to say it aloud. The words landed. Ezra looked at him, directly, which he did not often do with unguarded intent, and Leo looked back, and there was a moment of. Graham said something at the other end of the table that required a general response, and the moment ended, and dinner continued, and they talked about other things. Leo told him about the economics professors who'd mattered. Ezra told him briefly that his first week at Coldwell he had ironed the same shirt 4 times out of anxiety, and Leo listened with the quality of someone who found this both funny and something else, something that was reading Ezra rather than the story. At the end of the evening, Ezra walked out to the street. The night was cold and clear, the post-storm city in one of its intervals of actual winter rather than wet grey winter, proper cold, stars visible, their breath visible. Leo was beside him. They had walked out together without deciding to. It's a good night, Leo said. He was looking up. It is. They were walking in the same direction, Ezra toward his car, Leo apparently in the same direction. The financial district at this hour was quiet, the foot traffic of evening giving way to the sparser movement of people going home, their footsteps on the pavement, the cold. You're not what I thought you were, Leo said. He said it to the middle distance rather than to Ezra, the way he said things that cost him something. Ezra looked at him. I know what you thought. Most of it was fair. Some of it was. A pause and the rest. The rest was projection, Ezra said. You needed me to be a specific kind of person and you built the case for it. I understand why. Leo stopped walking. They were on the corner of the block, a streetlight overhead making the night specific and close. Leo turned to look at Ezra with the full attention that Leo wielded like a precision instrument when he chose to. I owe you something like an apology, Leo said, for 8 months of using the professional space to. No, Ezra said. He said it clearly. You were working with information I didn't have and you were accurate to the situation as you understood it. I earned the professional difficulty. I didn't earn what you actually knew, but that's a different thing. Leo looked at him. Something in his face was doing the complicated thing, the layered thing, the thing that was not one emotion but several, present simultaneously. Okay, Leo said finally. Okay, Ezra said. They stood on the corner for a moment longer. The cold was specific. The streetlight overhead was specific. The air between them had the quality it had been acquiring for months, charged, suspended, a held note. Good night, Leo said. His voice was quiet. Good night, Ezra said. Leo turned. He walked east into the night, his hands in his jacket pockets, not looking back. Ezra stood on the corner for a moment, 5 seconds, 10, and then turned south to his car. He sat in the car for a long time. He looked at the steering wheel. He thought about the thing Leo had said, you're not what I thought you were, and the specific quality with which he had said it. He thought about the laugh, the week he told, the iron shirt which he had never told anyone, the corner, the cold, the 5 or 10 seconds before they turned away. He thought, I need to make a decision. He still didn't make it. He drove home. He sat in his kitchen with the lights off for a while, which was something he rarely did. He was a person who lit rooms fully, who had no patience for insufficient light. But tonight the city through the windows was enough, the amber grid of it, everything still awake, and he sat in his kitchen and thought about someone walking east through the cold, and about being the kind of person who turns in the other direction and then thinks about it all the way home. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and said very quietly to no one, stop managing this. He was not sure what that meant in practice. He was fairly sure he was going to have to figure it out. Chapter 14, The Almost. Later. The second deal closed on a Tuesday, 17 days after the Kellerman celebration dinner. It was a smaller closing, fewer people, less ceremony, a brief signing session in a Meridian conference room that took 40 minutes and concluded with handshakes and coffee rather than a catered lunch. But it was good work, cleanly done, and there was something in the completion of it that Leo felt differently than he had felt the completion of Kellerman. He felt it as an ending. He had been doing his best not to feel it as an ending. He had been telling himself over the 17 days since the dinner that the deal's conclusion would be a natural boundary, that whatever was happening between him and Ezra Nairobi would resolve itself logically at the close of the professional structure that had enabled it, that the absence of a shared project would create the space for things to return to their appropriate positions, and he would be able to think clearly again. He had been telling himself this, and it had been becoming less persuasive every day, and now the deal was done and he was standing in Meridian's conference room, while everyone gathered their things and talked about next steps and timelines, and what he felt was not the beginning of resolution. What he felt was the specific absence of the thing he had been pretending to be prepared to lose. He signed off on the closing documentation. He shook hands. He said the appropriate professional things. It was good work, good collaboration, all of which were true. He watched Nairobi across the room, impeccable in the way he always was, talking to Meridian's managing partner with the ease of a person who was utterly in command of himself and his context. Ezra felt his gaze. This was, Leo had learned, reliably the case. Nairobi had a way of registering things that did not announce itself with any visible change, but which was consistent enough to be measurable. He turned slightly, not enough to face Leo, just enough to acknowledge the awareness. His expression in profile was closed, but not the cold closed of the early sessions. The controlled closed of someone who is managing something, which was a distinction Leo had learned to make, and which was not nothing. The room thinned, both teams scattered to phones and next steps and afternoon schedules. And then, without Leo exactly deciding to remain, he found himself in the conference room with only Nairobi and the quiet left behind by everyone else. He should leave, he knew he should leave. He had a meeting at 2 and a report to finish, and Priya's pointed look from across the room that had said, without words as she was gathering her things, "Don't do anything complicated." He didn't leave. Nairobi, who was organizing his files into a neat stack, with the efficiency of someone who had been organizing files for 15 years, looked up. He registered Leo's presence without apparent surprise. "What happens now?" Leo asked. The question was bare. He hadn't intended to ask it quite that way, quite that directly, but there it was. Nairobi was still. "The deal's done," he said. "Both firms move on to the next matter." "I meant," Leo started. He stopped himself. Nairobi looked at him. Leo looked back. In the silence, everything that had been accumulated over 6 months was present. The sessions and the bar and the storm and the dinner and the corner, and the 17 days of dealing with the growing insistence of something he had not yet named to Nairobi's face. All of it, and the conference room around them, and the light coming through the halcyon towers, windows grey and steady and full of early winter. "I meant," Leo started again. "I don't know what I meant." He did know, he just didn't know if he was going to say it. Nairobi looked at him with the attending quality, the full, specific kind, the kind Leo had been cataloguing since before he knew what he was cataloguing it for. He said nothing, but he was not moving away. "You know," Leo said. "Yes," Nairobi said quietly. The word was enormous in the room. Not a denial, not a deflection, not the professional management that Nairobi applied to most things. Just yes, I know what you're not saying, I know it too. Leo felt something happen in his chest, the specific release of something that had been held. He was also, simultaneously, standing at the edge of the thing he had been approaching for months and looking at the drop. He opened his mouth. The conference room door opened. One of Meridian's assistants, young, apologetic, already half-turning as he came in, said, "Mr. Nairobi, your car's here, I'm sorry to interrupt." "Thank you," Nairobi said, even immediate, back in command. The assistant left. The moment was gone. They stood in the room where it had been in the absence of it, and Leo felt the particular cruelty of timing. He almost laughed. He pressed his mouth together instead. He picked up his laptop. "I'll be in touch if there are any post-closing issues." "Yes," Nairobi said. He was looking at Leo with the expression he had carried into the almost question, still there, still present, not extinguished by the interruption. "Okay," Leo said. "Okay," Nairobi said. He left, he walked to the elevator, pressed the button, stood in the lobby until the elevator came, and rode down to the ground floor and walked out of the halcyon tower into the street. The cold hit him. He stood on the pavement outside and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and stood there for 60 seconds, breathing. He had been about to say something. He had been within a sentence of saying something significant, something that would have, one way or another, changed the shape of things. And then, an assistant, a car, the banal machinery of an afternoon. He thought about walking back up. He thought about texting. He thought about the 42 floors between the street and the conference room and the 6 months between the first session and today. He didn't go back, he took out his phone, he did not text. He walked to the subway and went back to his desk and sat in front of his screen and stared at the model for the next 3 hours without doing any meaningful work on it. Priya came by at 4:30 and set a coffee on his desk and said, without looking at him, "What happened?" "Nothing happened." "That's a very specific nothing, that's a nothing with a shape." He drank the coffee. He thought about the conference room and the almost and the assistant and the car and the question he'd left in the middle. He knows, Leo said. Priya turned to look at him. He knows, and I almost said it, and then someone came in and he made a gesture. It didn't happen. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then, are you going to let that be the ending? He thought about what happened now. He thought about the answer Nairobi hadn't given because he hadn't needed to. He thought about being 24 years old in a city that had never quite been his, having arrived here under the organizing force of an anger that had dissolved, and what was on the other side of that dissolution. No, he said, I don't think I am. Priya looked at him for a long moment, then she said very simply, good. Chapter 15. Ezra. He did not call. He had every reason not to call. The deal was concluded. The professional relationship was currently dormant. A call served no clear structural purpose. He catalogued these reasons with care and found them genuinely sufficient and did not call anyway. He did not call for 10 days. On the third day, Theo Marchetti came to dinner. Theo was 40, an architect, someone Ezra had known since his clerkship. They had been in the same building for 2 years, different firms, the kind of proximity that produces friendship when both people are honest enough and available enough for it. Theo was the person who had watched the Marcus situation unfold from a distance and had said when it was over, you handled that badly, not an accusation. A fact. Ezra had agreed with him, which was something he had not managed with anyone else. They went to a place in the midpoint district that Theo chose, Italian, unpretentious, the kind of place where the pasta was made that morning and the wine was honest. Ezra ordered and sat back and let himself be, briefly, in the uncomplicated company of someone who had known him long enough to make demands. They talked about Theo's projects, a residential commission in the hills north of the city, the particular structural challenge of the site. They talked about Theo's partner, Felix, who was in the process of finishing a doctoral dissertation on urban memory, and was, by Theo's description, either brilliant or losing his mind, and possibly both. They talked about mutual acquaintances. They ate. Then Theo said, without preamble, because Theo did not do preamble, someone's in your head. Ezra looked at him. You've been here for 2 hours, Theo said, and you've been present for about 40% of them. The rest of the time you're somewhere else. He thought about denying it. He thought about the specific cost of denying it to Theo, who had a memory like an archivist, and would reference the denial at a future date with precision. There's a situation, he said. A situation. A professional connection that has become, he stopped. He started again. Someone I've been working opposite, on deals, there's a history, it's complicated. Theo rested his chin on his hand, and looked at him with the patience of a person who has all evening. How complicated. Ezra thought about Leo. He thought about Marcus, the weight of that history, the fact that Leo knew what Ezra had done and what it had cost and had told him about it and then continued. Had continued working with him, continued turning up in sessions with the full quality of his attention, had said you're not what I thought you were on a street corner in the cold. He thought about the almost. He had been thinking about the almost constantly, which was notable because he was a person who, in general, did not find the near misses more significant than the things that actually happened. He was finding this one more significant. He was not sure what to do about that. Complicated, he said. There's a personal connection to someone from my past, someone I hurt. He said it plainly, without the management he usually applied to this fact. He knew about it for months before I knew who he was, and then he told me and we talked and he stopped. He's not, what came after the telling was not what I expected. Theo was very still, listening with the full quality of his attention. I almost, Ezra said. In the last session there was a moment, and then it didn't happen, and I haven't called him because there's no professional reason to call and I don't. He stopped. You don't know how to call someone for a non-professional reason, Theo said. He said it gently, without judgment, which was somehow harder to receive than judgment would have been. I know how, Ezra said. It doesn't come naturally. Ezra, Theo set down his fork. You have been 35 years old and doing extraordinary work and being alone for longer than I've been watching, and I've watched you manage that with a kind of grace that's genuinely impressive, but grace in management is not the same as choosing to be done with it. He looked at the table. Tell me about him, Theo said. And Ezra told him. He did not often tell Theo things. He was not, as a rule, a discloser, but tonight the wine was honest and the restaurant was warm and Theo was asking with the quality that was real asking, and the things came. The sessions and the arguing and the way Leo had been looking at him before he knew what Leo was looking at. The bar, the storm, the 2 inches of table he had not crossed. The dinner and the corner and the 20 seconds before they turned in their respective directions. The conference room and what had almost been said. Theo listened all the way through without interruption, which was not his standard approach to conversation, but was the correct one for this. When Ezra finished, Theo was quiet for a moment. Then, Ezra, I know. For once in your life. I know. Don't be smart about it. Don't build the case for why it won't work and use the case to keep yourself from the thing. Just go. It's not that simple. It is that simple. The complications are real, I'm not saying they're not, but they're complications of a thing that exists. Go toward the thing. Ezra thought about his father. He let himself think about it fully, the way he had been careful not to for 20 years. He thought about his father's hand finding his mother's in any room they shared. He thought about what it had meant to grow up watching that, to know that love was visible, that it was a practice, that the practice produced something you could see. He had grown up knowing this and had spent his adult life behaving as if he hadn't. He's younger, Ezra said. Yes. There's the history with. Yes. It's professionally. Ezra, Theo looked at him. When you're 80 and you look back at this conversation, do you want to have been the person who made the list? He held his glass. He looked at it. He thought about Leo saying I meant and stopping, and the quality of what was in his face when he stopped, and how Ezra had said yes, yes, I know, yes, and the assistant coming in. No, he said. No, Theo agreed. He drove home. He sat in his kitchen, the lights on this time, and thought about going toward the thing. He thought about what going toward it meant in practice, what it would require him to say, how it would require him to be. He thought about all the things he had not said to Marcus, to himself, to any room he had occupied with another person's full attention. He thought about the specific cost of not saying. He had been paying that cost for 2 years at minimum, and had been acting as though it were lower than it was. He opened his phone. He opened his contacts. He found Leo, filed under Waters, L, the professional designation he had never changed, and looked at the name. He wrote an email. He wrote it for 15 minutes, which was longer than he had spent on any personal correspondence in recent memory. He read it. It was professional. It was good and clear and professional and utterly insufficient to the purpose, which was to tell someone something that had been true for some time, and that deserved to be said without the management and precision he applied to everything. He deleted it. He wrote another one, shorter. This one said, I've been thinking about the conference room. I would like to continue the conversation we were having. Would Thursday evening work? He read it 3 times. He deleted it. He put his phone on the counter and went to the window and looked at the city. The amber grid, everything still awake. He thought about the thing he kept not doing, and the cost of it, and the alternative. He picked up his phone. His thumbs moved before his reasoning could intervene. He is 24 and has been carrying my history with his brother, and he is still, somehow, despite all of it, looking at me like. He stopped. He stood at the window with his phone and breathed. Then he opened a new message. He typed, Are you busy Friday? He sent it. He set the phone face down on the counter. He stood with his heart doing something specific and not unpleasant in his chest and waited. His phone buzzed. He picked it up. He read it 3 times. No. He wrote back, Good, can we meet somewhere, not a bar this time, just somewhere, 7 o'clock. He sent it before he could think about it. He was learning that there was a version of him that existed in the moment before reasoning arrived, and that this version sometimes made better decisions than the considered one. The response came in 30 seconds, name the place. He was smiling. He noticed this in the way you notice things you haven't done in a while, the unfamiliar quality of the muscle. He named a place. He put his phone down. He stood in his kitchen in the city light and thought, all right, here we go. End of Part 3. Part 4, The Breaking Open. Chapter 16, Friday. Later. He almost cancelled 4 times. The first time was Thursday evening, sitting on his couch with his phone in his hand, staring at the name the place message from Nairobi and thinking, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what this is. I don't know what I want to happen, and therefore I don't know how to prepare for it, and I do not like being unprepared. He did not cancel. He set his phone down and made dinner and watched something on his laptop that he did not follow and went to bed. The second time was Friday morning, when he woke at 6 and lay still in the particular way that the body sometimes knew something the mind hadn't fully processed yet, a quality of alertness that wasn't quite dread and wasn't quite anticipation but was somewhere in between. He thought, I could send a message. Work came up, I'm sorry. He thought about what Nairobi's response would be: precise, accommodating, no recrimination. He thought about what Leo would feel, having sent the message, and knew the answer with some clarity, like the person who reached the door and turned back. He got up, he went to work. The third time was at lunch, talking to Priya, who said, "Are you going tonight?" And he said, "Yes," and she said, "Are you sure?" And he said, "No," and she put her fork down and said, "Leo, you have been in some form of this situation for 6 months. If you cancel tonight, you are going to spend the next 6 months in the same situation, slightly more advanced in regret. Go." He went back to his desk and worked until 5:30, and went home and showered, and stood in his apartment in a towel looking at his wardrobe and thought, "This is the most idiotic I have felt since I was 16, and then picked something and put it on and went." The fourth almost cancellation happened in the taxi, stopped at a light 3 blocks from the restaurant, at which point he had the clear and irrefutable thought, "I have feelings for the man who hurt my brother, and I am about to sit across from him at a table I specifically chose not to call a bar, and I have no plan, and I don't know what I want, and I am 24 years old, and this is insane." The light changed, the taxi moved, he was there. The restaurant was called The March, not the Aldrich Hotel Bar, not the Porter, not any place associated with work or deal sessions, or the professional geography they had shared. It was a small place in a neighborhood neither of them lived in, warm and slightly noisy in the way of restaurants that were good and knew it without being smug about it. Leo had picked it with the specific intent of choosing somewhere he could be himself rather than the version of himself that existed in conference rooms and hotel bars during blackouts. He arrived at 7:05. He had told himself he would arrive at 7 and had arrived at 5 past, which was the most pathetic compromise of his adult life and also not bad, given the 4 cancellations. Nairobi was already there. Of course he was always early. He was sitting at a corner table, of course he was, and he had his coat over the chair beside him, and he was not looking at his phone or a document or anything, just sitting with his hands rested on the table and the mild attentiveness of someone who is comfortable waiting. He looked up when Leo came in and something in his face, something in the particular stillness of it, shifted. Not dramatically, just changed quality. Leo crossed to the table. Nairobi rose, not formally, just the natural physics of a person acknowledging someone's arrival. They did not shake hands, they had done that in professional contexts many times, and this was not that context, and neither of them extended the gesture. Leo sat, Nairobi sat. "You chose well," Nairobi said, meaning the restaurant. "I've been here before." "It's good," he had already reviewed the menu, apparently. It sat closed at the edge of the table. Leo picked up his own menu. He read it without reading it. He put it down. "I almost cancelled," he said. A pause. "How many times?" "4. Nairobi considered this. "I sent the message before I could stop myself," he said, "if you're looking for equivalent information." This was the thing. This was the specific thing that Leo had been trying to manage and had been failing to manage for months, Nairobi being honest about himself in these small, precise ways that were not small at all. He was not a person who said things easily, and when he said them, they arrived with the weight of things that had been considered. "Okay," Leo said. He felt something loosen in his chest, some held thing letting out. The waiter came. They ordered wine, food, the ordinary machinery of a restaurant, the thing that people did to give themselves time inside a conversation. The wine came. Leo drank his. He looked at the table, the restaurant, the window, and then at Nairobi, and Nairobi was looking at him with the full attending quality, present and still. "What are we doing?" Leo asked. He hadn't meant to start there, but he was tired of the circumnavigation. "I don't know precisely," Nairobi said. "I know what I want to be doing." The sentence arrived. Leo sat with it. "What do you want to be doing?" he said. A pause, not avoidance, thinking. Nairobi's pauses were always thinking. He had learned to read the difference between a pause that was deflection and one that was the process of arriving at something true. "I want to sit across from you in a place that has nothing to do with work," Nairobi said, "and have a conversation that I'm actually in, rather than managing. He stopped. "I want to not manage this." Leo looked at him. "You don't know how to not manage things." "No," a pause. "I'm learning." Another pause, slowly. Something about this, the acknowledgement of it, the way it sat without defensiveness, made Leo feel the thing again, the thing he'd been sitting with for weeks and still didn't have a clean name for. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," Leo said. He said it the way he said things when he'd decided, directly, not apologetically. Nairobi looked at him for a moment. Then, "I still have the same car I bought when I made partner." I can afford considerably better, and Claire has told me twice that it reflects on the firm, and every year I think I'll replace it, and every year I don't. Leo blinked. Why not? My father drove the same car for 11 years. I don't know that it's more complicated than that. He picked up his wine. Your turn. Leo thought. I have a spreadsheet, he said, for every city I've lived in or visited that tracks the neighborhoods by several categories: crime, food, access to green space, walkability. I've been updating it since I was 19. Nairobi's expression did the thing where the controlled quality softens slightly at the corner. Does it have Westhaven? It has 18 neighborhoods in Westhaven, yes. What does the Aldrich district score? High on food, high on access, low on green space, above average overall. The Midpoint district. Leo looked at him. You know where I live. You told me the night of the storm. He had said I'm in Midpoint, and Nairobi had retained it, filed it, and was now deploying it as a small and specific demonstration that he had been paying attention. Leo was, he found, disproportionately undone by this. Midpoint scores well, he said, higher on green space, slightly lower on food, which is wrong. There are some excellent places, but the data I was working from when I set it up was limited. You should revise the methodology. I've been thinking about it. They looked at each other across the table, and Nairobi was almost smiling, the predecessor of a smile, the thing Leo had seen a handful of times and catalogued with something embarrassingly close to tenderness. Tell me another one, Leo said. One what? Something you've never told anyone. Ruby was quiet for a moment. I almost quit, he said, at year 3, the public defender work before I moved to corporate. There was a client, I'm not going to give you details, a client who was convicted on evidence I believe was flawed, and I couldn't get the conviction overturned, and I remember standing outside the courthouse and thinking, I cannot keep doing this, I cannot keep. He stopped. I was 26. I thought the law was the place where things could be made right. And it was, but the making right was slower and messier, and less guaranteed than I had built my entire framework on, and when it failed, he looked at the table. I went home, and I sat in my apartment for 3 days and didn't go to the office. Leo said nothing, listening. On the 4th day I went back, not because I had resolved anything but because I didn't know what else to do, and eventually the work became the thing it is now, which is imperfect and useful and mine. He paused, but I remember those 3 days. The client, Leo said carefully, do you still think about them? Yes, simple, immediate. I will think about that person for the rest of my life. Leo thought about this, about the quality of it, the fact that Nairobi carried this and carried it without performing the carrying, without using it to construct a narrative of himself as a person of conscience. It was just there in him, one of the things that were there. He said, I've been angry at people on behalf of Marcus before. You're not the first, but the anger hasn't ever been this complicated by other things. Nairobi looked at him. Other things. I don't, he stopped. He met Nairobi's gaze directly, which he could do now in a way he hadn't been able to do in the early sessions. I find you, he stopped again. He thought about Priya saying you are in love with Ezra. Nairobi. He thought about Marcus saying I'm not angry at him anymore. He thought about what it meant to be sitting at this table in this city, across from this specific person, and to be 24 and trying to say something true about it. I find you very difficult to stop thinking about, he said. I have found you very difficult to stop thinking about for longer than is easy to admit. The restaurant around them went on with its work. The noise, the warmth, the ordinary life of a Friday evening. Nairobi was very still. How long, he said. Leo thought about it honestly. Before the hotel, he said. I thought it was the anger, the way anger keeps a person present, but the anger's gone and he made a small gesture. The rest of it isn't. Nairobi looked at him for a long, specific moment. Then he picked up his wine and held it and said, I have been struggling for some time with the categories I put this in. I have been telling myself that it was professional consideration, or the complexity of the situation, or the fact that you're young and, he stopped. He said, none of those are wrong as facts, they are wrong as explanations. What's the correct explanation? Leo asked. The correct explanation, Nairobi said, is that I have been trying to manage myself out of something that is not manageable, and failing. Leo let out a breath. It came out slightly longer than he expected, the kind of breath that had been held for some time. Good, he said. Nairobi looked at him. Good. Yes, good, he set his glass down. I was beginning to think I was imagining it, the moments. There he looked at the table, 2 inches of table. A very long pause. No, Nairobi said quietly, you weren't imagining it. The food arrived, they ate. They talked, really talked, the way they had in the bar during the storm, but different, because they were not storm-stranded and not raw with revelation. They were choosing to be here at this table in this conversation. Leo told him about the city he'd grown up in, the particular texture of it, the smallness that had felt confining at 18 and that he could see now as also a kind of density, the way everyone knew everyone, and that was both surveillance and community. Nairobi told him about Westhaven when he had first arrived, his clerkship, the building he'd lived in that he could not now afford to live in the building next to, the specific freedom of anonymity in a city that didn't know you yet. They talked about the people in their lives. Theo, whom Nairobi mentioned in a way that made Leo think, this man has one friend and the friend is important to him, and he doesn't say so directly, but I can tell. Priya, whom Leo described and Nairobi listened to and said, with something that was very close to actual warmth, she sounds like someone who refuses to let you get away with things. And Leo said, yes, that's exactly it. They closed the restaurant. The waiter came around twice with the mild patience of a person who would like to turn the table and was prepared to wait an unreasonable amount of time. Leo noticed and said they should go, and Nairobi said yes, and they paid and gathered their coats and went out. The cold was clean and sharp, different from the dinner warm of the restaurant, and they stood on the pavement outside for a moment, adjusting to it. I don't want to go home, Leo said. He said it clearly, looking at the street. No, Nairobi said. What do we do with that? Walk, I think, for now. They walked. The neighborhood at this hour was quiet, residential, the occasional lit window, the particular piece of a city late on a Friday. They walked without a destination, which was unusual for both of them. Leo thought about this, about the fact that they were both people with destinations, with purposes, and they were walking without one, and that this felt not like aimlessness but like something deliberate. They talked about the strange things that came up when you were just walking in the dark. Music briefly. Leo had tastes that surprised Nairobi, apparently because when he named an album he loved, Nairobi said, I would not have predicted that. Leo said, what would you have predicted? Nairobi said, something with more architecture. Leo laughed and said, it has architecture. And they had a brief and genuine argument about what architecture in music meant, and Leo lost the argument on the formal terms and won it on the actual point, and Nairobi acknowledged this with the particular precision of someone who did not give ground without meaning it. They ended up at a small park, a square block of trees and benches and a dried winter fountain, quiet, lit with lamp posts. They sat on a bench. The cold was there but manageable. Above the buildings, sky was visible, not stars. This was the city, but the quality of night sky without cloud cover, a deep and specific blue. I'm going to say something, Leo said. He was looking at the fountain. Okay, Nairobi said. I know what you're afraid of, not the specific content, though I think I know some of that too, but the shape of it. He paused. You love something and it becomes a reason to leave before you can be left. I know that shape, I've seen it, I'm not. He stopped. He turned to look at Nairobi. I'm not Marcus, and you're not the person you were 3 years ago, and I think you know that, but I think you need someone to say it out loud. Nairobi was looking at the fountain. His profile in the lamplight was precise, specific, the jaw and the line of his nose, and the particular quality of a face that had been engineered by 20 years of practice to not show what it was doing. But Leo could see underneath it now. He had learned to see underneath it. I'm not going to do what I did then, Nairobi said. I know that as a statement about my intention, I can't prove it. I know, Leo said. I'm not asking you to prove it. What are you asking? Leo looked at him. I'm asking you not to end this before it starts because you're afraid of what it could be. Nairobi turned to look at him. They were close on the bench, not touching, but close, the winter air between them very thin. That's a very specific ask, Nairobi said. I'm a specific person. The lamplight caught the particular quality in Nairobi's eyes that Leo had been cataloguing, the warmth that lived behind the control, the thing that was there if you had learned to look for it. It was present now, unmanaged, looking back at Leo without the professional distance. Yes, Nairobi said, you are. They sat in the park for a while longer, in the cold that was becoming less cold by virtue of proximity, and the specific quality of warmth that came from being next to someone you were not managing your response to. They talked and then did not talk, and the not talking was the kind that had content in it. At some point, Leo thought, I am happy. The thought arrived quietly, without fanfare, in the way real things arrived. He was 24 and sitting in a frozen park at 11 at night next to the most difficult person he had professionally encountered, and he was happy, and he understood that this was what the last 6 months had been moving toward, through all the sessions and the storms and the almost and the anger and the dinner and the corners. We should get home, Nairobi said, eventually. The practical voice, but not cold, the practical voice with something else in it. Yes, Leo said. They walked back to the main street. They found respective transportation. Leo would subway, Nairobi would call his car, and stood at the corner of the block waiting. Friday, Nairobi said. Yes. This was a good Friday. Leo looked at him. He was not performing this. It was the simplest thing he had said all evening, and it arrived with the weight of its simplicity. Yes, Leo said, it was. The car arrived. Nairobi moved toward it, then paused. He turned back. He looked at Leo with the full attention, unhurried, present, the kind of looking that said, I am looking at something I have decided to look at. I'll call you, he said, not about work. I know, Leo said. He got in the car. Leo stood on the corner and watched the car pull away, and then stood there for another minute, hands in his pockets, the cold clean and crisp, the city doing its nighttime things, and thought, all right, we're doing this. He was not afraid, precisely. He was something more interesting than afraid. He was in it. Chapter 17, What Fear Looks Like from the Outside. Ezra. There were 11 days between Friday and the moment he started to pull back. He had not intended to pull back. He had sat in his car on the way home from the park that night and thought, with a clarity he did not always have about himself, you have made a choice. The choice is made. What comes next is honoring it. He had meant this. He had meant it with the same conviction he brought to other decisions, the ones in contract rooms and courtrooms, the ones that mattered. Then 11 days had passed, and the clarity had done what clarity sometimes did. It had acquired the texture of thought rather than resolution, and thought was something he could work on, work over, examine from angles until the examination became its own form of avoidance. He was very good at examination. He was less good at the things that came after it. They had spoken on the phone 3 times since Friday, not about work, true to the intention. Once to continue a conversation about music that had started in the park. Once because Leo called to tell him about a thing that had happened at Meridian that was genuinely funny, an event that involved a malfunctioning espresso machine and the managing partner's Monday morning, told with the dry precision that Leo brought to things he found actually amusing. And Ezra had sat at his kitchen counter at 7 in the evening and laughed, and then listened for another 15 minutes because the voice on the phone was something he had begun to depend on. Quietly, and this was the thought that began the pulling back. Not the voice, not the dependence itself, the awareness of the dependence. The way he had sat at his kitchen counter at 7 in the evening with the phone against his ear and felt, here, this is where I am, not at my desk, not in the case file, not in the professional container that had organized his waking hours for 15 years, here at the counter in the ordinary warm evening in this. And what the here contained, what it meant that he was here and that the here was defined by a voice on a phone, was something he had immediately, reflexively, begun to examine for its vulnerabilities. He was doing it again. He knew he was doing it again. The knowledge did not stop the doing. He had told Leo in the park, I'm not going to do what I did then. He had meant it. He had said it with the clarity of someone who understood what the alternative cost. And still, 11 days later, with the voice on the phone still warm in his memory and the Friday park still specific and close, he felt himself contracting, becoming more measured in his messages. Responding with the professional portion of himself, rather than the portion that had sat on a bench in the cold, and said this was a good Friday. He recognized it. He recognized it with the clarity of a person who has been shown their own patterns from the outside, and has incorporated the recognition without yet incorporating the change. On a Wednesday evening, 11 days after Friday, a week after the last phone call, he went to the river. This was a thing he did occasionally. The river walk on the eastern edge of the financial district was not well known to the people who didn't work there. It was a maintenance path primarily, a narrow walkway between the water and the backs of the commercial buildings, with functional lighting and the occasional bench and the sound of the river which was, in November, moving with purpose and speed. He had found it in his first year at Coldwell, in the period when he was working 14-hour days and had needed, somewhere in those hours, a 10-minute reset. He had kept it as a private thing. He had never taken anyone there. He went there now alone and stood at the railing above the water and let the river be the river. He was thinking about Marcus. He had been thinking about Marcus more clearly lately, not the managed version, not the one he kept behind glass, but the actual one. He was thinking about the 2 years they had spent together, the genuine quality of them, the way Marcus had moved through the world with an openness that Ezra had found simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. He was thinking about why he had ended it, which he had told Leo in the bar, fear. The specific fear of having something worth losing. He was thinking about the fact that he had lost it anyway. He had ended it to protect himself from the loss, and the loss had happened regardless, and what he had additionally produced was damage. He had been trying for the past 2 years not to think about this clearly, and he was thinking about it clearly now, standing at the railing above a November river, and what arrived with the clarity was not self-flagellation. He was past that, it served nothing. What arrived was understanding, the specific anatomized understanding of how fear operated in him, not as a feeling but as a competency. He was afraid, and therefore he produced management. He produced distance. He produced the careful, precise, professionally adequate version of himself that was available to everyone and could be withdrawn without loss because it had never been fully given. He thought about Leo. He thought about Leo saying, "You're not what I thought you were." He thought about Leo saying, "I find you very difficult to stop thinking about." He thought about the specific courage of both of these statements, said by a person who had genuine and specific reasons to protect himself from Ezra Nairobi and had chosen, with full information, not to. He thought about what it meant to receive that, and to begin, in the 11 days since, to quietly pull back toward the safer version. He heard footsteps on the path. He was not surprised when they stopped beside him. He had not told anyone about the river walk, but he had told Leo enough things now that Leo, finding this particular piece of him, was not outside the range of the possible, and there was something in the night, in the quality of the steps, the measured deliberate pace, that he had learned. "How did you know?" he said. "I didn't," Leo said. "I was walking, I found you." He looked at him. Leo was in his coat, hair catching the wind off the river, the particular focused quality that he brought to things he was taking seriously. "You've been pulling back," Leo said. He did not deny it. "Yes." "For about a week." "Yes." Leo looked at the river. He looked at it with the attending quality, the way he looked at things when he was deciding how to say something true. "I know what that is," he said. "I recognize it. I grew up watching my brother be left by someone who disappeared while standing right there, and he stopped. He started differently. I'm not going to pretend I don't know what it looks like when you start to go somewhere else." Ezra looked at the water. The river was dark and fast and specific, moving without uncertainty in any direction. "I'm not going to do what I did with Marcus," he said. I know I'm not doing that, but I'm also," he stopped. He let himself be stopped, let the sentence sit without completion, which was not something he did. He who completed every thought, every argument, every sentence that left his mouth. He let it sit. "You're scared," Leo said, not unkindly, just accurately. "Yes." "Of what, specifically?" He thought about Theo. "What are you scared of?" He thought about what he had said, that at 50 he would have been very good at his work and not much else. He thought about the real version of the fear, the one underneath that, which was, that he would do this, open something, let something be real, and it would be wrong, and the wrongness would cost not just himself but the person across from him, and he had already been wrong once, badly. And the cost had been real and had a name. "That I'll be wrong again," he said, "that I'll let this become real, and then I'll be wrong again in the way I was wrong before, and this time it will be." He stopped. "You know what it would cost. It would cost more than just me." Leo was quiet for a moment. "You mean Marcus?" "Yes." Ezra, his voice was not patient in the managed way, in the way that was really waiting, patient in the way that was actually present with the thing. "Marcus is okay. You know that. He's not. He is not a person who needs to be protected from the possibility of you being happy. And if you're using him as a reason to avoid," he paused, "that's not for Marcus, that's for you." The words landed precisely and accurately, and in a way that required him to stand still and receive them. "Yes," he said, after a moment. "You're afraid," Leo said again. "That's real. That's not something I can fix or argue away. But it's also," he turned to look at Ezra, and his expression in the lamplight and the river dark was the most direct Leo had ever been, which was saying something. "It's not a reason, not the way you're using it." Ezra looked at him. He looked at him with the full attention that he usually held back, that he applied to problems and files and terms and evidence, but rarely, carefully, to people. He looked at Leo with it now, let it be full and unmanaged, and what he saw was a man who had every reason to be cautious and was choosing not to be, who was standing at a railing above a November river telling him, with the precision and the warmth that were Leo's specific combination, that he was worth the risk, that Leo had assessed the risk and was assessing it still, clear-eyed, and was here. "I don't know how to do this without worrying that I'll break it," Ezra said. It was the truest thing he had said on the subject. "You've been not breaking it," Leo said. "For months, you've been not breaking it while hatting yourself for not breaking it, which is..." Something in his expression moved, the almost smile that Ezra had learned to wait for. It's a very specific Ezra Nairobi way to do things. He heard his name. He heard it the way you hear your name said by someone who is using it to mean something specific about who you are, not just as an identifier. I want to try, he said. The words arrived before his reasoning could revise them. I want to try to do this correctly. I won't be. I know I'm not easy. I know the history is complicated and that you're carrying. Stop, Leo said. He stopped. Just tell me, Leo said, without the case built around it, without the arguments and the acknowledgements and the... He made a gesture brief that meant the management. Just tell me what you want. He looked at the river. He looked at the city behind them. He looked at Leo, who was standing in the lamplight waiting, not pressing, simply present. You, he said. Single word, nothing around it. Leo looked at him for a moment. Then he let out a breath, the same kind of breath Leo had let out in the restaurant, the held-long kind, and something in his face did the complicated thing but differently, resolved into something simpler and more complete. Okay, Leo said. Okay, Ezra said. They stood at the railing. The river moved below them, fast and dark and purposeful. The city hummed at their backs. The lamplight was specific and warm. They were standing beside each other in the way that people stood when the distance between them had become the thing worth noticing. Leo's hand found the railing next to Ezra's, not touching, beside. Ezra moved his hand the 2 inches. They touched. It was small. It was the size of 2 hands finding each other on a cold railing in a city that had never asked their permission. It was also the largest thing that had happened to Ezra in 2 years, and he let it be, and did not manage it. Come on, Leo said after a while. I'm cold. He almost laughed. Where do you want to go? Somewhere warm, I don't care where, just walk with me. They walked. Chapter 18, The Confrontation. The weeks that followed were the strangest and best of his adult life, which was a sentence he had not expected to find himself thinking at 24, and which he held carefully, the way you held something new. They were not together. That was the technical answer to Priya's question, delivered with his eyes on his screen. What is happening? He had said, it's complicated. She had said, less complicated than it was. He had said, yes. She had said, good, and left it there. The complicated truth was, they were in a state of being in it without a name for it. They talked on the phone. They had had dinner twice more since Friday, at different places, both of which Leo had chosen and Nairobi had absorbed with the manner of a person learning to go somewhere that was not their choice and finding this, to their mild surprise, acceptable. They had walked, this had become a thing, somehow, walking in the city in the evenings after dinner, the route always different, the destination always wherever they ended up. They had stood at the river twice more. They had not. They had not kissed. This was a fact that occupied a certain amount of Leo's thinking, not with urgency but with something like suspended attentiveness, the way you were attentive to something that was present and coming without being rushed. He was not rushing it. He did not know precisely why, but the not rushing felt right, felt like the shape of the thing, that it would arrive when they were ready, and they were both, in their respective ways, still getting ready. He was 24 and had not been someone who took things slowly. He was learning. Then something happened that he hadn't expected, something that cut through the suspended attentiveness and made him walk into Nairobi's office on a Thursday afternoon without calling first. It was Priya, 2 weeks into the whatever it was, who heard it. Meridian's social director, a woman who organized the company's professional networking events, mentioned in passing to someone who mentioned it to Priya that a mutual contact in the industry had reached out about setting up an introduction for Ezra Nairobi. A personal introduction. The kind that meant what it meant. A potential match, a social arrangement, the professional world's version of a setup. And Nairobi had declined. This was information that arrived to Leo in 3 steps, Priya to the social director to the mutual contact, and was therefore not guaranteed to be accurate, and was also not information that, technically, meant anything specific, because declining one introduction said nothing about the underlying reasons. He told himself this. He sat with it for 2 days and told himself, this is not definitive. This is not something to act on. This is gossip and proximity, and the particular way that information moved through the world of interlocking professional circles, and it could mean anything or nothing. Then it was Thursday, and he was in a taxi, and he told the driver the address of the Hale building. Delia looked up when he came in. She assessed him with the specific accuracy that he had come to understand was her primary professional skill, and she said, he's in, and reached for her phone. Could I, he paused, could I go in if that's... She looked at him for a moment. Then, he doesn't like surprises. I know. She looked at him a moment longer. Then she set down the phone and nodded. He went to the door. He knocked, because the door was open, but you knocked, apparently. Delia's look when he'd raised his hand to go in unannounced had communicated this clearly. He knocked, and Nairobi looked up from his desk. The look, the specific quality of the look, was not surprise, exactly. It was the thing that happened when something arrived that wasn't unexpected, but was earlier than anticipated. "Leo," he said. "I need to talk to you," Leo said. He came in. He closed the door. He had not entirely planned this, which meant he was operating on the version of himself that existed before reason caught up, and this was possibly a mistake, but he was here now. "Sit down," Nairobi said. His voice was even. "I don't," Leo looked at the chairs across the desk and thought. No, not across the desk, not in this configuration, not with the desk and the professional arrangement between them. He moved to the side of the office, where there was a sitting area, 2 chairs, a low table that was clearly for client conversations, the less formal space. He sat there. After a moment, Nairobi came and sat in the other chair. "Someone reached out to you," Leo said. "A potential, an introduction, and you declined." Nairobi looked at him steadily. "Yes." "Why?" A pause. "I think you know why." "I want to hear you say it." "Later. We have been," he stopped. He gathered himself. "We've been in some version of this situation for months. You walked toward it and then you pulled back and then you walked toward it again, and I've been patient because I know what you're working through and I know why it's slow. But I also," he stopped again. He said, "I need to know if you're actually in this. Not as a professional consideration or a complication you're managing or a situation I need to know if you're in it." Nairobi was very still. The office around them was quiet, the specific quiet of a place where work happened and was currently not happening. The ambient professional world paused. "I declined the introduction," Nairobi said, "because there is someone I want to spend my time with, specifically, not generally." A pause. "I have not been as clear about this as I should have been. I've been building a buffer between what I want and what I'll allow myself to have." Leo looked at him. "It's a habit," Nairobi said, "a very practiced one. I'm working on it." His voice was, underneath its evenness, something else, earnest, specifically, honestly earnest, which Leo had heard perhaps 3 times in 7 months, and which was, each time, more significant than the time before. "I know," Leo said, "I know you're working on it, and I want to be someone you work on it with, not someone you work on it at a safe distance from." Nairobi looked at him for a long moment. Something was happening in his expression, the layers of it, the management unwinding, the specific quality of a person choosing to be seen. "Tell me it's not real and I'll walk out," Leo said. He said it clearly, not as a challenge, as an actual offer. "Tell me it's not real and we go back to professional colleagues and we're fine. I can do that, but I need you to tell me." Nairobi was quiet for a moment. Long enough that Leo's chest had begun to do the thing it did when he was preparing for a particular kind of disappointment. "It's real," Nairobi said. The words were simple. They were not accompanied by anything elaborate. No qualification, no case built around them, no management. 2 words placed in the room with the directness of someone who has made a decision and is honoring it. Leo sat with them. "Okay," he said. "Yes," Nairobi said, "okay. So what do we do?" Nairobi looked at him. The question was genuine, and Leo knew, for the first time in the months of this, that Nairobi did not have the prepared answer, that he was in it without the case built, without the exit strategy, without the managed distance. He was here and he was uncertain, and he was here anyway. "I don't know," Nairobi said, "but I want to figure it out." Leo looked at him for a moment. Then, despite everything, despite the week and the Thursday and the confrontation that had dissolved into something different from what he'd walked in with, despite all of it, he felt the almost laugh arrive. "That," Leo said, "is the most honest thing you've ever said." Nairobi looked at him with the quality that was almost a smile. "I'm working on it," he said. "I know," Leo looked at him. "I knows you are." Chapter 19, CHOSING. Ezra. He spent the week after the office confrontation doing what he always did, working. He took on a preliminary engagement letter for a healthcare services deal that would keep him occupied for months. He had 3 client calls and a partnership meeting, and a difficult conversation with a junior associate who was burning out and needed to hear it from someone who had. He ironed his shirts and read his case files and called his mother on Sunday and did not tell her everything but told her some things, and she was quiet in the way she was quiet when she was paying the most attention, and she said, "You deserve to be happy, Ezra." And he said, "I know, Mama." And she said, "Do you?" And he said, "I'm getting there." He had meant it, he meant it now, a week later. Sitting in his kitchen at 7 on a Friday morning with the city going grey outside and the coffee gone cold because he'd forgotten it again, his legal pad in front of him with 3 words written on it that he'd put there at 5 a.m. when he'd woken and not been able to stop thinking. Just go, Theo. He looked at the words. He thought about Theo and the dinner and what he'd said. When you're 80 and you look back at this conversation, do you want to have been the person who made the list? He thought about his father. He had been letting himself think about his father lately, fully, without the glass he usually maintained over those memories. He was thinking about a specific Saturday afternoon when he was 12, the year before the diagnosis, when his father had come to find him in the small room that was his bedroom in their apartment and had said, "Come, we're going for a drive. No agenda, no destination." They had driven out of the city and into the hills, and his father had played music that Ezra now could not hear without the afternoon arriving with it, and at some point his father had said, "You know what's worth spending yourself on?" He had said, "What?" His father had said, "Things that make you feel it, whatever it is for you, the aliveness. Don't spend yourself on things that don't give you that." He had been 50, Ezra's father, and he had not known that he had 4 more years and had not been speaking from fear but from practice. From a life lived toward the things that gave him the aliveness, which were his work and his wife and his son. Ezra looked at the legal pad. He thought about what gave him the aliveness. He had spent 15 years answering this question with the work, always the work, and the work was true. He loved the work, the precision of it, the stakes of it, but the work was not all of it. He had been pretending it was all of it and knowing, in some part of himself he had cordoned off, that it was not. He thought about Leo. He thought about Leo in the way he was now allowing himself to think about Leo, which was fully, without the managed distance. He thought about the voice on the phone, the park bench, the river railing, the office, the confrontation. Nairobi said it's real in the specific tone of something irrevocable. He thought, you have been afraid of this for 2 years and you are still afraid and the fear is not going away, and you can choose to manage the fear or you can choose the thing. You cannot have both. You cannot have the safe distance and the thing. You have to choose. He had been choosing the safe distance for 20 years. He understood this now, clearly and without sentimentality. He had been choosing it and calling it discipline and professionalism and care for others when really, when truly, when stripped of the vocabulary he applied to everything, it was just fear. Plain, persistent, not special. He thought about his father's hand, finding his mother's in every room. He thought, I want that. I have always wanted that, and I have been pretending I didn't because wanting it, and not having it was easier to manage than wanting it and trying. He put down the legal pad, he picked up his phone. He called Theo. "It's 7 on a Friday," Theo said, with the voice of someone who was awake but had not decided to be. "I know I'm going." A pause. Going where? To his apartment. A longer pause, then, with a warmth that Theo kept mostly contained but occasionally let out, "It's 7 in the morning." "I know. Leo might not. I know I'm going anyway." He heard Theo's exhale, not impatience, something more like relief. "Good," Theo said. "Go." He changed his clothes. He left the apartment. He took the subway. He could have called the car, but the subway was faster and he understood, past the point of wanting to be comfortable about this. He wanted to be uncomfortable about it. He wanted to feel it as a choice rather than a management. The Midpoint district in the early morning had the quality of a neighborhood waking up before it was ready. The coffee shops just opening, the streets damp from the night's rain, people in their coats and their earphones moving with the purposeful urgency of morning commuters. He walked the 4 blocks from the subway exit to the Claremont building and stood in front of it and looked at it. 14 floors. Leo was, he didn't know the floor precisely. He knew the building because Leo had mentioned it more than once and he had filed the information, as he filed everything, without necessarily intending to use it. He did not know the apartment number. He went to the intercom panel. He found Waters. He pressed the button. Silence, then the slight crackle of the intercom coming to life. Then, what? Not alarmed, sleep husky, flat, the monosyllable of someone who had been woken at 7:15 on a Friday by the building intercom and was not ready for more than one syllable. "It's me," Ezra said. A pause so long that he thought the intercom had cut out. Then Ezra. "Yes." Another pause. "It's 7:15. "I know. On a Friday." "Yes." "Are you," a pause, "are you actually outside my building at 7:15 on a Friday?" "Yes." A very long pause, then a buzz and the door clicking open. He went up. The elevator was slow. one of those old building elevators that moved at the pace of something that had always moved at this pace and had no opinion about it. He watched the floor numbers rise. He was not nervous, precisely. He was in the state of someone who has made a decision and is now on the far side of it, in the territory where the decision becomes real. The elevator opened. He found the apartment, 1107, which was reasonable inference. Leo's building had a regular numbering system visible in the elevator panel, and knocked. The door opened. Leo was in clothes that were not morning clothes exactly, sweatpants, a worn grey sweatshirt that said something across the chest that Ezra didn't catch, his hair in the state of someone who had been asleep recently and had done minimal reorganization. He had, against all probability, the particular look of someone who had been awake for about 15 minutes and was running on the specific clarity that comes just after sleep, before the day's management arrived. He looked at Ezra. His expression was something complicated, several things at once, the layers of it moving. "Okay," he said, stepping back from the door. "Come in." The apartment was warm, not designed precisely but considered, bookshelves assembled from different points in Leo's life, a desk that was clearly where real work happened, a kitchen that had the signs of someone who cooked occasionally and well, a couch with a blanket on it that suggested last night's reading, a window that gave onto the midpoint street below, the morning coming through it grey and clean. It was full of evidence of Leo, of who Leo was when he wasn't at a conference table, the photography book on the coffee table, the handwritten notes on the desk in the precise small script, the pair of running shoes by the door that were actually worn, not displayed. He absorbed all of it in the way he absorbed things, comprehensively, without appearing to look. "Coffee," Leo said. He was already in the kitchen, moving with the particular ease of someone in their own space. "Yes, please." He stood in the kitchen doorway and watched Leo make coffee, the French press method, which Ezra recognized as the considered choice of someone who had decided that this one thing was going to be done correctly. Leo moved with the focus of the recently woken, not self-conscious about being seen in this state, which said something about where they were. "You're going to tell me something," Leo said. He was looking at the press, not at Ezra. "Yes. Something you've been working up to." "Something I've been working up to for," he thought about it accurately, "longer than I've admitted." Leo turned. He leaned against the counter with his arms crossed, not defensively, just rested. His expression was open and watchful, and underneath both of those, something careful in the way of people who have been careful for good reason and are considering whether to stop. Ezra said, "I know I'm not easy." He said it without preface, the way he had decided he would say it, without the case built around it. "I know the history between us is specifically complicated in ways that most things aren't. I know I have patterns I'm working through that are not going to disappear because I've identified them. I know I am better at strategy than I am at," he stopped, "at just being in something without a plan." Leo was watching him, very still. "I know all of that," Ezra said, "and I want to try anyway, specifically with you, because you are." He stopped again. And this time the stopping was not management but search, the genuine reaching for the accurate word. "Because you are the person who sat in a hotel bar in a blackout and told me the most significant thing you were carrying, and then worked through 2 more deals with me, and told me I was not what you thought, and stood at a river in November, and came into my office and said it's real without letting me pretend it wasn't. You are specific, and I want the specific thing. I am asking you to be patient with me when I get it wrong, which I will, because I am not." He paused. "I am not finished learning this." Leo looked at him for a long moment. "Are you always going to make declarations like you're giving a closing argument?" he said. Ezra looked at him, probably. "Okay." He stepped back from the door. Leo pushed off from the counter. He came into the kitchen doorway, into the narrow space between the kitchen and the main room where Ezra was standing, and he was very close, close enough that the morning warmth of the apartment was specific, and the grey light from the window caught the amber in his eyes, and Ezra was aware of everything with the complete attention he reserved for things that mattered. "I have some conditions," Leo said. "Tell me." "You have to actually call when you say you're going to call, not when the professional situation warrants it, just when you want to." "Yes." "You have to tell me when you're pulling back, not after, before." "I'll try." "Trying isn't." "I'll tell you," Ezra said. "When I notice I'm doing it, I'll tell you." Leo looked at him. "Okay," a pause, "and you have to occasionally let me see the apartment." He blinked. "The apartment. You've been to mine, I haven't been to yours. That's an imbalance I find notable." "That's your condition." "One of them," there was the almost smile arriving, "the others we can negotiate." Ezra looked at him. He looked at him with the full, unheld attention, the one he had been giving Leo in pieces and halves for months, and was now giving completely. Leo received it without looking away. "Okay," Ezra said. "Okay," Leo said. He raised his hand. Slowly, with the deliberateness of someone choosing to do something they have been thinking about for a long time, he raised his hand and put it against Ezra's jaw. His palm was warm. His thumb was at the edge of Ezra's cheekbone. He looked at him for one more moment, the attending quality, the specific quality. And then he kissed him. It was not what Ezra expected, which was perhaps the most honest thing that could be said about it. He had been preparing in the abstract way he prepared for things, for something that matched the months of tension, something that would have the quality of finally. What it had was something different, quiet, unhurried, the quality of someone who knew what they wanted and was not rushing toward it but settling into it, the way you settled into something worth keeping. He kissed him back. He put his hand over Leo's hand at his jaw and felt Leo's exhale, the long-held kind, against his mouth, and something in his chest did something specific and warm and irreversible. After they stayed close, Leo's forehead against his, the morning light coming through the window, the coffee press on the counter behind them waiting. "The coffee," Leo said. "I know. I'm going to ruin the press if we don't." "I know." He did not move. Leo laughed, the real kind, brief and surprised and warm. "Come on," he said. He took Ezra's hand. He pulled him gently toward the kitchen. "I'll make you coffee and you can tell me what else you were working on at 7 on a Friday morning." "I wasn't working on anything," Ezra said. "I was just," he thought about the legal pad, the 3 words. "I was just deciding." "And you decided to show up at my building?" "Yes." Leo looked at him sideways from the kitchen. The particular look, the warm one. "Good decision," he said. He poured the coffee. They stood in the kitchen, Leo at the counter, Ezra one step away, the apartment around them full of the ordinary morning, and drank it. The city outside the window was waking up, the street filling with the small movements of a Friday getting underway, and inside the apartment it was warm and specific, and Ezra thought the most real he had felt since a long time. Since before he had stopped allowing himself real things. He thought about his father's words, things that make you feel it, the aliveness. He thought, here, this is it. He thought it without managing it, without examining it for vulnerabilities, without the case against it arranged and ready. He thought it simply, in the ordinary morning light of someone else's kitchen, with a cup of coffee and the warmth of a hand recently at his jaw. He thought, I'm going to be okay at this, not perfect, not without difficulty, but okay, and okay is enough to start. Leo said something, a small thing about the coffee, about the morning, about a thing he'd read the night before, and Ezra listened, and replied, and the conversation went on, ordinary and warm and his. Chapter 20, What Was Always There. Later, he told Priya on the Monday. He sat down at his desk and looked at her across the divide of their workspace and said, something happened. She turned in her chair. She was wearing the expression she wore when she had been waiting for something and it had arrived. Something, she said. Nairobi showed up at my building at 7:15 on Friday morning. A pause. He showed up. He showed up. At your building? Yes. At 7:15. You're going to repeat everything I say. I'm processing, Priya said. She held her coffee with both hands. Did he? What did? He gave a speech, Leo said. He said it simply, not mockingly, just accurately. It was very Nairobi. It had a thesis and supporting points and a conclusion. And the conclusion was that he wanted to try with me specifically. He looked at his screen. He found, smiling, which was fine. He had decided to stop performing not smiling, and then I kissed him. Priya set her coffee down. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, I called it. You did? 7 months ago I called it. You called it approximately 2 months after I arrived at Meridian, yes. And you said? I said you were insane, yes. And now? He looked at her, the smile was still there. And now I think you were right. Priya picked her coffee back up and drank it with the satisfaction of someone who had been right about something important and was allowing themselves to feel it. Are you happy? She asked. He thought about Friday morning, the apartment, the coffee, the 2 hours of ordinary conversation that had been the most natural thing. The way Nairobi had sat at his kitchen table and talked without the professional container, without the management, just talking, and the way his face had done the things it did when he was not performing for anyone. Yes, Leo said, I think so. Good, she turned back to her screen. Now go do your work, we have a call at 10. The hardest conversation was with Marcus, but it was also not in the end, as hard as Leo had been afraid it would be. He drove out 3 weeks after Friday, a Saturday, the drive familiar and Winterbear. Marcus opened the door and took one look at him and said, very simply, something's different. Yes, Leo said. They sat at the kitchen table. Jamie was in the studio. The house had the particular Saturday morning quality of weekend ease. Marcus made tea and Leo looked at the table, the same table again, and thought about how this surface had witnessed most of the difficult conversations of the past 3 years. I need to tell you something I should have told you sooner, Leo said. He told him from the beginning, recognizing Nairobi in the Vickers deal, 8 months of saying nothing, the hotel and the blackout and the bar and what was said in it, and the months that followed and Friday morning, all of it in the order it had happened. Marcus was quiet through all of it. He held his mug and he listened, and his face went through things. Leo watched it carefully, looking for the reopened wound he had been afraid of. He saw something more complex, recognition and grief that was old and acknowledged rather than new, and something else he couldn't name immediately. When Leo finished, Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, he told you he was afraid. Yes. That he ended things because of the fear. Yes. Marcus nodded. He turned his mug in his hands. I wondered, he said quietly. For a long time I wondered if there was something in him that I had missed, that explained it. He looked at the table. It doesn't make it okay, what he did. No, Leo said, I know. But it helps to understand it. He looked up. It helps to know it, arbitrary. Leo looked at his brother, at the man who had rebuilt himself, who sat in this kitchen with a steady warmth and a partner who left paint on the doorframe, who had done the 3 years of work and arrived somewhere genuinely good. He's sorry, Leo said. Not to me on your behalf. He said it in the bar that you deserved better. He said it like he'd been carrying it. Marcus was quiet. You don't have to do anything with that, Leo said. I'm not asking you to. I know, Marcus said. A pause, then Marcus set his mug down and leaned forward and said, Are you happy? Leo blinked. That's what I want to know is whether you're. Leo, his brother's voice was patient and warm and very specific. I have been okay for a long time. I have Jamie and my work and I'm not a wound that needs managing. I'm a person asking my brother if he's happy. He looked at Marcus, at the steady face, the ease. Yes, he said, I think I am. Marcus nodded. He picked up his mug. Good, he said, take care of each other. He said it the way he said things he meant without ceremony, simply as a fact. Take care of each other. The sentence carried the full weight of Marcus having loved Ezra, and having healed and being generous enough with the healing to say, go, take what's there, make it good. Leo drove home with the windows down despite the cold, because he needed the air, and thought about all of it. The 3 years and the 8 months and the hotel and the river and the kitchen and the table and his brother saying take care of each other. He thought, I intend to. The next 6 weeks were the beginning of learning each other without the professional structure, without the deal to organize around or the session to attend or the crisis to navigate. This was, Leo discovered, a different project entirely. Ezra was as advertised in all the ways. He was precise in his preferences, which Leo found easier to work with than he'd expected, because at least you knew what you were working with. He liked his coffee made a specific way and had strong opinions about where to sit in restaurants, always the corner, always the wall. He was constitutionally incapable of being late to anything, which Leo found both admirable and occasionally irritating when it meant arriving to parties 20 minutes before anyone else. He did not do well with unstructured time. Saturday afternoons without a plan produced a quality of restless unease that he was not always aware of, and Leo had learned to recognize an address because the fix was simple: give it a structure. A walk, a bookshop, a drive, anything with a shape. Leo was as advertised in his own ways. He was impatient with pace, always wanting to be further along in a thing than was reasonable. He thought out loud at a volume and a rate that Ezra had required some adjustment to, coming from a personal style of careful internal processing. He had a habit of taking on more than he should and then not asking for help, which Ezra caught with a precision that was, Leo found, both useful and slightly unsettling, the feeling of being accurately seen. They fought, not badly, not harmfully, the fights that people had when they were comfortable enough to fight, when the fight was the proof of investment rather than the sign of withdrawal. They fought about small things mostly, about packing once with more feeling than the topic warranted, until Leo realized that packing was not what they were actually arguing about and said so, and Ezra considered this and said, "You're right," he said it cleanly. This, Leo discovered, was one of the things he loved most about Ezra Nairobi. The man could say you're right and mean it and move on, without residue. He did not carry the residue of small defeats the way some people did. He was too interested in the actual truth to be invested in being the source of it. They had dinner with Priya and her boyfriend, a structural engineer named Arvind, who shook Ezra's hand and said, very correctly, "Priya's told me nothing about you." Priya said that was not precisely true, and Leo said that was more than either of them had asked for, and Ezra, to Leo's particular pleasure, was funny. Not performed funny, not networking funny, but the dry and specific kind that arrived from his particular reading of a situation. Arvind said afterward to Priya that he understood why Leo liked him. Priya said she had always understood. There was an evening in Ezra's apartment, the first time Leo had been there, after Ezra had finally, with the slight ceremony of someone opening something they had been keeping closed, invited him. It was large by city standards, high up, which Leo expected, very clean in the way of a person who kept clean not as performance but as a mode of being things in their places, the absence of clutter that was not a bareness but a particular kind of order. The shelves of books which Leo had expected and which were what they were, the professional texts, the history, the reread Ellison. And on the corner of the desk, the small wooden bird rough-hewn, which Leo did not ask about immediately. He asked about it later, sitting on Ezra's couch with a glass of wine and the city through the windows. Ezra told him about his father. The full version, not the summary Leo had heard in the bar, but the specific one, the Saturday drive, the hills, the music, the words, things that make you feel it, the aliveness. Leo listened without speaking. When Ezra finished, the room was quiet, the city outside doing its amber work. "He sounds like someone worth missing," Leo said. Ezra looked at the bird. "Yes," he said, "he was." Leo moved the glass to the coffee table. He moved across the couch, the 2 inches that were not 2 inches anymore, and put his head on Ezra's shoulder. He felt Ezra's body absorb the fact of him, the shift of weight, the accommodation, automatic, easy, the naturalness of someone who had decided. Ezra's hand found his, over the back of the couch. Warm. They sat. The city went on being the city, the amber light, the river somewhere past the buildings, the ordinary, specific, irreplaceable evening. Leo looked at Ezra's profile, the precise features, the particular set of the jaw, the quality of someone who had spent 20 years learning to be still and was also, quietly, available. He thought about the conference room and the bar and the storm and the park and the kitchen and all the mornings and evenings between, and he thought, this is what it was always moving toward. Not despite the history, with it. The history was the reason the thing that existed between them had the shape it had, the care in it, the specific attention, the way they moved toward each other, having understood, through all of it, something true about the other person. He said, looking at the window rather than at Ezra, "I knew, the first meeting, that I was that and," he paused, he said it honestly, "that you were significant. I didn't know to what, I thought it was the anger, but the anger was always doing double work." Ezra was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said, "for me too," a pause. "I thought it was the professional resistance, the sharpness, but I was paying more attention than that warranted." "So you were?" "Yes," a pause. "I was paying the kind of attention that doesn't have a professional justification." Leo laughed, the brief, warm kind. "The first session," he said, "I watched you walk into the conference room and I thought, he's going to be a problem." "I was. Not in the way I meant." A long pause, the city outside. "No," Ezra said, "not in the way you meant." He moved his hand slowly. He turned Leo's hand over in his, looking at it, the way he looked at things he was deciding to know. Leo let him. He felt the deliberateness of it, the care. "Leo," Ezra said. "Yes." He looked at him, the full attention, unheld. "Thank you," he said, "for all of it, the hotel, not walking away from the work, the river." A pause, "coming into my office." Leo looked at him. "Thank you," he said, "for showing up at 7:15 on a Friday." Ezra was almost smiling. The real kind, Leo could see it arriving, the specific quality of it. He had stopped cataloging it and started simply waiting for it, and it arrived now, small and complete. "It was a good decision," Ezra said. "Yes," Leo said, "it was." He leaned up and kissed him, easy, unhurried, the warm, ordinary kind. Ezra kissed him back. The city outside was bright and indifferent and alive. They stayed in the specific evening that was theirs. End of Part 4. Epilogue 6 months. The morning had the quality of April light, which in Westhaven meant something different from everywhere else Leo had lived. Softer than winter's grey, but not yet summer's flat brightness. a light that had intention in it, that made things look like what they actually were rather than what the season required. He woke first. This was usual. They had been learning each other's sleep patterns the way you learn the other practical geographies, slowly and with revision, and what they had found was Leo slightly earlier, Ezra exactly at 5 if undisturbed and willing to let the 5 turn into 6 if disturbed in the right way. This was a Thursday, which was a day when neither of them had early obligations, and the 5 had become 6 had become close to 7, and now Leo was awake and Ezra was not, and the apartment was doing the morning things that Ezra's apartment did in April. The light coming through the high windows at the angle that meant early afternoon would be extraordinary. He looked at the ceiling, he thought about the day. Not the deal day, not the professional day, the actual day. He had a call at 10 and a report to finish and Priya's lunch to attend, and he was going with Marcus and Jamie to a gallery opening in the evening where Jamie had a piece. He realized, looking forward to all of it with the kind of uncomplicated anticipation that he had not always had access to. It was new, this quality of forward-looking that didn't have an agenda underneath it. Ezra moved, the particular settling of someone who was awake, but not ready to perform it. Then, "What time is it?" 7:15. A brief, specific sound that was not quite complaint. "You don't have anything until 9, Leo said. "I know. So, I'm aware." Leo looked at the ceiling and was, privately, entirely charmed by this. By the morning voice, the unmanaged quality of it. By the fact that he was here, in this apartment that he now knew as well as his own, the corner desk, the bird on the desk, the view of the city from the high windows, the shelf of books that he had read his way along over the months, the kitchen where Ezra had, with some encouragement, learned to make something other than coffee for breakfast. 6 months, he had the thought and sat with it. 6 months from the Friday morning at the kitchen doorway. 6 months from Ezra making the closing argument of his life in sweatshirt weather and Leo deciding to let it land. The deal was long closed. 2 more had opened and closed since. Neither of them shared. They were careful about the professional overlap. Not hidden but not performed. The boundary maintained where it needed to be. Meridian knew, Caldwell knew. The professional world being what it was, the professional world knew, and the professional world had produced, after its initial churn, something approximating acceptance, which was all anyone had asked for. Ezra's hand found his shoulder. Not a reach, just there, the automatic gesture of someone finding a familiar place. "Good morning," Leo said. A pause. "Yes," Ezra said. His voice was still the morning version, lower, less precise. Leo loved the morning version. They argued at breakfast. This was, by now, a known possibility, the particular friction of 2 people who were both opinionated and had been professional adversaries, and had not lost the quality of precision in their engagement, which made even breakfast-level disagreements more articulate than most people's. The argument was about something structural, whether Leo was taking on too much in the second quarter, whether the rate of new project intake was sustainable, whether the report he'd been working on for 3 weeks was actually done, or was in the state of being done that was really avoidance. "The report is done," Leo said. He was eating his eggs without looking at Ezra. "You've said it's done twice in the past week. And now it's actually done. What changed between Wednesday and today?" He stopped, he put his fork down. "I revised the methodology." "What aspect?" He explained the methodology revision. Ezra listened and then said, with the precision that Leo had learned to distinguish from criticism, "That's better." And Leo looked at him and said, "I know," and that was that, and they ate, and it was fine. This was the texture of it. Not smooth, neither of them had pretended it would be smooth, but functional in the way that things that mattered were functional. They argued and resolved. They made demands and met most of them. They were better at it than Leo had expected, which he thought was probably a function of the fact that they had both been paying attention long before they were paying attention to the right thing. The gallery that evening was a small place in the arts district, good work on white walls, the organized chaos of an opening, Jamie's piece in the corner of the second room. It was a sculpture, physical, the kind of thing that required you to walk around it, a form in bronze that was both human and not, the particular quality of Jamie's work that was always doing 2 things at once. Marcus was there with the satisfied expression of someone watching their partner be good at their thing, which Leo had noted was one of the most specific pleasures of an adult life, watching the person you loved be competent in the thing they loved, the pride in it that wasn't about you at all. Ezra, who had not previously met Marcus, was in Leo's peripheral awareness all evening. He had asked the week before carefully, is it okay for me to be there? And Leo had thought about it and said, Marcus wants you there. He said take care of each other, and you being there is part of that. Ezra had been quiet a moment. He said that. Yes. A longer quiet. Okay, he said, not the managed okay, the settled one. At the gallery, the introduction was the simplest version of something that had required enormous amounts of time to make simple. Marcus shook Ezra's hand and looked at him with the specific quality of someone who knows a person's history and is meeting them anyway, which was a particular kind of grace. He said, "It's good to meet you." He meant it in the complicated way. It was good, and it was complicated, and both things were true. Ezra said, "I owe you more than a handshake." He said it directly, simply, without the case built around it, but I'm glad to start there. Marcus looked at him for a moment. Then something in his face resolved, not a forgiveness scene, not a dramatic completion, just recognition, a person seen. "Me too," he said. They looked at the sculpture together, the four of them, Jamie explaining the process, Marcus adding the specific color that came from having watched it be made, Leo asking the questions he actually wanted to know, and Ezra listening with the full attention he gave to things worth attending to. The gallery was warm and lit, and full of people looking at things that had been made. Leo thought, standing between his brother and the man who had become, was becoming daily, deliberately his, that this was what the story looked like from outside, what it looked like when you were in it rather than fighting it. 4 people in a gallery in the ordinary warmth of a Thursday evening, all of them arrived at this precise moment through completely different routes, and here and present and fine. Late after the gallery, Ezra's apartment, the city outside the windows doing its amber nighttime work. Leo was almost asleep, the particular half-state, aware but not committed. Ezra was reading, or had been. The lamp was still on, the book closed on the nightstand. He said into the quiet, "Do you regret the storm?" Leo opened his eyes, the ceiling, the lamp's warm spread. He thought about the question. He thought about the Aldrich Hotel and the bar and the blackout and the whiskey and the white windows, and telling Nairobi, without planning to, the most significant thing he was carrying. He thought about what had happened because of the storm, the conversation, the walk away and the walk back, all the subsequent steps. "No," he said, "not the storm." "What do you regret?" He thought about it, the time before it, he said. 8 months of using the work to be near you without admitting I wanted to be near you. A pause. The anger, not that it happened, it was real, it was about Marcus, but the way I used it to avoid looking at everything else. "Yes," Ezra said, his voice was quiet. "Same." Leo turned onto his side. Ezra's profile in the lamplight, looking at the ceiling. The particular quality of his face when he was not performing, when the day's management was set down and he was just here. "You could have left the bar," Leo said. "The night of the storm, when I sat down." "I know. Why didn't you?" A pause, long enough to be honest. "Because I wanted you to stay," Ezra said. I had wanted you to stay for months, in various rooms, and I didn't have a reason that was professionally justifiable, and I told myself that was the bar, that I needed the justification. And the storm. There was no professional justification. There was just you, at the other end of the bar, not looking at me, and I didn't want to be the person who looked away. Leo was quiet for a moment. "I didn't look at you because I was afraid if I looked at you I'd say something," he said. "You said it anyway." "Eventually." Yes, a pause, a small specific warmth in the word. Eventually. The city outside was its nighttime self, alive, indifferent, beautiful in the way that cities were beautiful when you were warm inside and looking out. The lamp was on. The books were on the shelf. The bird was on the desk. Leo thought I would not undo any of it. Not the hatred, not the hotel, not the months of almost and the hard conversations and the fear they'd both carried and the working through of it. Not one part of it. Because the path was the thing, not just the destination, but the specific, irreducible path, which had made them what they were to each other. He said, "Hey." "Yes," Ezra looked at him. "I'm glad we're here." A pause, the full attending quality, the warm one unheld. "So am I," Ezra said. He reached over and turned off the lamp. The room went dark, the city outside still present through the windows, amber and alive, sufficient. Leo found Ezra's hand in the dark, the automatic ease of it. They held on. Outside, the city went on being the city, the river moving in the dark, the bridges stitched across it, the grid of lights making its amber pattern against the night sky, everything still awake and relentless and particular. 2 men in a room above it all, neither of them alone, both of them choosing this, every day, with the specific intention of people who know what it cost to get here and have decided it was worth it. The city. The warm room. The held hands in the dark. the thing that had always been moving toward this.